All right, welcome back, fight fans, to another deep dive into boxing's most contentious moments. And when we talk contentious, controversial, downright infuriating, I think one name immediately springs to mind for so many of us, doesn't it, Marcus?
Oh, absolutely, Harrison. You set me up perfectly there. We're talking about June 9th, 2012. We're talking about Las Vegas. We're talking about Manny Pacquiao, the Filipino superstar, facing off against Timothy Bradley Jr. And what everyone expected to be, like you said, a coronation, a passing of the torch almost. Instead, what we got was, well, I'm just going to say it, one of the biggest robberies in modern boxing history.
A robbery is certainly the sentiment of the vast majority, no doubt about that. But let's dig into why it felt like a robbery, because sometimes these things get exaggerated in hindsight. But with this fight, man, the evidence is overwhelming, isn't it?
Overwhelming doesn't even begin to cover it. I mean, Pacquiao was undefeated. Bradley was undefeated, sure. But Pacquiao, he was on another level at that point, you know? He was supposed to breeze through this. And when you watch the fight, Harrison, he did breeze through it. He won, what, 10 of the 12 rounds? Maybe even 11. It was pure dominance from Pacquiao. Footwork, those lightning-fast combinations, his ring generalship. He was dictating everything.
You could see it clear as day. He was landing the cleaner shots, the more effective punches. Bradley was game, don't get me wrong. He was coming forward trying to make it a fight. But Pacquiao was just sharper, defensively sound, offensively precise. There were moments where Bradley just looked bewildered, like he couldn't figure out the puzzle.
Exactly! And that's what made the score so utterly baffling when Michael Buffer got on the mic and started reading those cards. I remember exactly where I was, watching it live. My jaw hit the floor. Judge Jerry Roth, bless his heart, he had it 113-115 for Pacquiao, which was the correct scorecard in my opinion, and for most people. But then came CJ Ross and Dwayne Ford, both scoring at 115-113 for Timothy Bradley Jr. I mean, Harrison, how? How did they see that?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it, Marcus? It wasn't just a close fight that could go either way. This was a fight where one fighter was clearly superior for the vast majority of the rounds. And the reaction wasn't just from casual fans. It was immediate and universal.
Oh, tell me about it. I mean, promoter Bob Arum, the guy who promoted Pacquiao, he publicly said he was ashamed for the sport. When your own promoter is saying that, you know something's fundamentally broken. It wasn't just a bad decision. It felt like a stain on boxing itself.
And it went beyond public opinion, too. The WBO, which is one of boxing's governing bodies, they actually commissioned an independent panel of 5 veteran judges to review the fight. All 5 unanimously scored it for Pacquiao. Not a single dissenting voice among experienced, impartial judges. That right there tells you the magnitude of the error.
5-0, Harrison. 5-0. And then you had a ringside poll of 53 media members, the people who are paid to watch these fights closely and objectively. 50 of them favored Pacquiao. I mean, that's what, 94%? That's not just a consensus. That's almost statistical certainty that Pacquiao won that fight. It really makes you question what those 2 judges, Ross and Ford, were even watching.
It certainly does. And this wasn't a fight where you could say, oh, well, Bradley was the aggressor, maybe they favored that. Pacquiao was effectively aggressive. He was landing more. He was moving better. He was defending well. He checked all the boxes for what a judge should be looking for. Effective aggressiveness, ring generalship, clean and effective punching, defense. He excelled in those categories.
He dominated in those categories. And you know, Harrison, it wasn't just a loss for Pacquiao. It was a watershed moment for boxing, I think. It ignited this international outcry about judging reform. Because if something this blatant can happen at the highest level, with 2 world-class undefeated fighters, what hope do smaller shows and less famous fighters have?
It exposed a vulnerability, didn't it? The idea that even with overwhelming evidence, even with clear visual cues, individual judges could still come to such a wildly different conclusion. And it wasn't a case of subjectivity being a gray area here. It felt like a complete detachment from reality by those 2 judges. It's almost like they were scoring a different fight.
I often wonder if they had their own agenda, or if it was just pure, unadulterated incompetence. Because if you watch that fight, you You just can't come to that conclusion if you're being honest with yourself and with the criteria. It makes you paranoid, you know? Like, is this fixed? Or are these people just not good at their jobs? Either way, it's terrible for the sport.
That's where the debate really sparks, doesn't it? On one side, you have the data, the punch stats, the expert panel, the media polls, the promoters' outrage, all pointing to an irrefutable conclusion. Pacquiao won. And then you have the reality of the official decision, which says Bradley won. How do we reconcile those two things? Is there nuance we're missing, or is it just a plain old screw-up?
There's no nuance here, Harrison. It's clear as day. When you have 50 out of 53 media members scoring it for Pacquiao, when you have an independent panel of 5 veteran judges all scoring it for Pacquiao, the nuance argument just doesn't hold water. It was a clear-cut victory for Pacquiao. Bradley even admitted in his autobiography that he felt he didn't win the fight initially, though he later walked that back.
See, that's what makes it so fascinating and so frustrating. Because boxing, by its very nature, is subjective to a degree. We don't have a scoreboard like basketball or football. It's not about how many times you score a touchdown. It's about effective aggression, ring generalship, clean punching. These are qualitative metrics. But there's a point where subjectivity crosses into objective error, and I think this fight, for many, was that line.
It wasn't just a line, Harrison. It was a chasm. They jumped across the chasm, took a helicopter over it, and then landed in a completely different dimension. I mean, look, I get it. Sometimes a punch that looks good doesn't have much behind it. Sometimes a fighter is doing subtle things that only a trained eye catches. But what subtlety was there in Pacquiao's clear dominance? The speed, the angles, the way he was consistently landing the harder shots. It wasn't subtle, it was obvious.
And this is precisely why we're talking about it today, and why it remains such a flashpoint, because it forces us to ask, is boxing objective enough to have clear right and wrong answers, or is the sport so subjective that reasonable people can genuinely disagree on the same 4 rounds of action? And in this case, it felt like the disagreements weren't reasonable.
Reasonable? They were delusional. I mean, I've had debates with folks about obscure fights, close rounds, where you can see both sides. But this wasn't that. This was a complete, outright denial of what actually happened in the ring. And it wasn't just a tough pill for Pacquiao to swallow, it was a tough pill for the entire boxing community.
So let's put it to our listeners, Marcus. We've gone over the details, the stats, the outrage. But when you rewatch that footage, what do you see? Do you see a competitive fight where Bradley did enough to nick rounds? Or do you see a dominant Pacquiao performance that was wrongly scored?
Yeah, seriously. Go back and watch it with fresh eyes if you can. Try to pretend you don't know the outcome, and then tell us, honestly, who got robbed. Because it feels like a very clear answer to me. And more importantly, Harrison, why do you think those 2 judges saw it so differently than almost everyone else on the planet?
Because that's the core question, isn't it? Are we all watching the same sport, or are we just seeing what we want to see? And think about this for a second. If someone you trust completely, a friend, a mentor, someone whose boxing knowledge you respect, watched this same fight and came to the opposite conclusion as you, what would that tell you? Would it change your mind, or would you just think they're wrong?
Man, that's a deep cut right there, Harrison. If someone I trusted completely told me Bradley won, I'd probably think they needed their eyes checked, or maybe they were having an off night. Because for me, it's that black and white. It's that undeniable. And I think for most people who've watched boxing for any length of time, it is too.
It speaks to the enduring mystery, doesn't it? How something so tangible, so physical, can be interpreted so wildly differently by just a handful of people in positions of power. The human element, for better or worse, is always going to be part of the equation in boxing.
And it's what keeps us talking, keeps us debating, and honestly, keeps us coming back for more, even when it drives us absolutely crazy. So to all our listeners out there, drop your takes in the comments, your scorecards, your hot takes, your conspiracy theories. Let's see if we can actually settle this once and for all. Spoiler alert, we probably can't. But hey, that's what makes this so much fun, right?
Exactly. The debate rages on. And the Pacquiao-Bradley eye fight will forever be one of those fights that define the conversation around boxing judging. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll catch you next time with another deep dive.
Keep fighting the good fight, folks!
All right, Marcus, prepare yourself. Because tonight we're diving headfirst into a moment in boxing history that still sends shivers down the spines of fans and analysts alike. May 7th, 1988. Las Vegas. A night that was supposed to crown a new star, but instead became a cautionary tale.
Jay, you know exactly what night you're talking about because cautionary tale is an understatement. We're talking about the Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker versus Jose Luis Ramirez WBC lightweight title bout. And if ever there was a night that highlighted everything wrong with boxing's judging, that was it. I mean, it was a robbery, plain and simple, executed in front of the whole world.
Robbery is a strong word, Marcus, but in this specific instance, it might just be the most accurate. Let's set the stage for anyone who wasn't around or hasn't had the dubious pleasure of watching this fight. Pernell Whitaker's Sweet Pea was on the ascent. He was a phenomenon, honestly. This guy was a defensive wizard, an artist in the ring. His footwork, his head movement, his ability to slit punches, it was almost supernatural. He wasn't just avoiding shots. He was making guys miss by inches and then making them pay.
Yeah, Sweet Pea was unique. He wasn't a brawler, he was a technician. A true sweet scientist, as they say. He didn't always look for the knockout, but he broke down opponents with sheer skill and ring intelligence. He came into that fight with Ramirez as a rising star, and everyone knew he was destined for greatness. This was supposed to be his coronation, his coming out party on a major stage.
Absolutely. And Ramirez, bless his heart, he was a tough, relentless champion. He came forward, he threw punches, he tried to make it a fight. But the thing about Sweet Pea was, he just didn't let you fight your fight. For 12 rounds, Marcus, Whitaker was in a different zip code. He controlled the pace, he dictated the distance, he was in and out, slipping punches like he had eyes in the back of his head, and then countering with precision.
Oh, he dominated him. I mean, you watch that fight today and it's almost laughable how one-sided it was. Ramirez was swinging at air, hitting gloves, getting tagged with quick, sharp counters. Whitaker was a ghost in there. CompuBox stats which weren't as prevalent then but were still tracked, and every single ringside observer, I'm talking respected journalists, fellow fighters, commentators, they all agreed. Whitaker won no fewer than 9 rounds. 9 rounds, Jay. That's a near shutout in a 12-round fight.
It was overwhelming. Showtime commentators who were calling the fight live were in agreement. They were praising Whitaker's masterful performance, talking about his ascension. There was no ambiguity in their voices. No, oh, this round could go either way. They saw what everyone with a functioning set of eyes saw. Whitaker putting on a clinic.
So when the final bell rings, you're expecting the inevitable, right? Whitaker raises his hands, everyone cheers, he gets his belt, and we move on to his next legendary performance. But that's not what happened, Jay. That's not what happened at all.
No, it certainly wasn't. And this is where the story takes that dark turn. When the scorecards were read, only one judge, Jack Woodruff, got it right. He scored it 117-113 for Whitaker, which is a very fair, accurate reflection of the fight. But then, the other two judges, Mickey Van and Franz Marti, they inexplicably scored the fight for Ramirez. Ramirez, the fighter who was clearly outclassed, outboxed, and outthought for 12 straight rounds.
It defied logic. It defied reality. How do you watch that fight, Jay, and score it for Ramirez? I mean, what were they watching? Were they even in the same arena? Were they distracted? Or was something far more nefarious at play? Because it wasn't a close fight. It wasn't subjective interpretation. This was blatant. It was almost insulting to anyone who loves the sport.
That's exactly it, Marcus. This wasn't a Hagler-Leonard situation where every round was a chess match and could legitimately swing either way. This wasn't a draw that felt fair because both guys had their moments. This was a clear, dominant performance by one fighter, and two judges somehow found a way to award victory to the other. Whitaker's manager, Shelley Finkel, filed a formal protest within 4 days, which tells you how immediate and widespread the outrage was. Boxing observers universally called it a blatant robbery.
And it became a rallying cry. It exposed serious flaws. It wasn't just about bad judging anymore. It raised questions about competence, about integrity, about whether these judges were even watching the same sport we were. It pushed the conversation about judging reform to the absolute forefront of boxing. It was a scandal that rippled for years.
It absolutely did. So, Marcus, we've laid out the facts as widely understood. On one side, you have the irrefutable evidence, the punch stats, the unified opinion of expert commentators, the protests, the subsequent investigations. This side argues it was a clear-cut robbery, a black mark on the sport, a failure of justice. There's no nuance, no subjectivity. It was just wrong.
And that's the side I stand on, Jay. Firmly. You don't need to be a boxing expert to see Whitaker won that fight. You just need eyes. This wasn't some deep philosophical debate. This was fact versus fiction, and the judges chose fiction. It's infuriating, even all these years later. It's the kind of thing that makes people lose faith in the sport.
I hear you, Marcus, and honestly, it's hard to argue against that overwhelming tide of evidence. But let's play devil's advocate for a moment, just for the sake of understanding. Is there any way to interpret this as something other than corruption or gross incompetence? Could there be, and I stress could, a sliver of an argument for nuance, for subjectivity, for some context we're missing, not to justify it, but to understand the breakdown.
Nuance. Jay, with all due respect, what nuance is there in giving a fight to a guy who landed maybe a third of the punches, was constantly chasing shadows, and never had Whitaker in any real trouble? What context could possibly explain away two judges seeing the exact opposite of what everyone else on the planet saw? I mean, unless they were scoring for aggression alone, ignoring defense, ignoring clean punching, ignoring ring generalship. But even then, Ramirez wasn't even effectively aggressive. He was just aggressive ineffectively.
You raise a very valid point about ineffective aggression, and traditionally, defense isn't always rewarded as heavily as offense, even if it should be. Some judges might be heavily weighted towards who's coming forward, who looks like they're trying to win. But even with that bias, Whitaker was landing clean counters. He wasn't just moving, he was hitting and not getting hit. That's boxing at its purest. It's the art of hit and not get hit. He mastered it that night.
Exactly. He wasn't just dancing, he was scoring. He was making Ramirez look foolish, making him miss, and then popping him with shots. That's effective boxing. That's how you win rounds. So if a judge isn't seeing that, then what are they seeing? Are they just seeing the guy coming forward and going, oh, he's trying harder, he gets the round? That's a fundamental misunderstanding of the sport.
It certainly is, and it brings up the core question of what boxing judges are supposed to be scoring on. The 10-point must system, right? Effective aggression, ring generalship, defense, clean and effective punching. Whitaker clearly excelled in 3, arguably all 4 categories. Ramirez, while showing heart, just couldn't solve the puzzle. So when two judges score it for Ramirez, it implies a radical reprioritization of those criteria, or a complete failure to perceive them.
A complete failure. It's hard to imagine with all the replays, all the analysis, how anyone could come to a different conclusion today. But back then, in the heat of the moment, with no instant replay for judges, I mean, maybe they just had a terrible night, maybe they were positioned badly. No, I'm trying to find an excuse, and I can't. It just doesn't compute.
And that's the real debate we're leaving our audience with. Because we're talking about a moment in time, but the implications are timeless. This wasn't about close rounds. This was about two judges somehow finding a way to award victory to the fighter who was undeniably dominated. And it raised serious questions about whether judges were even watching the same fight as everyone else. Think about that, Marcus. If someone you trust completely watched this same fight and came to the opposite conclusion as you, what would that tell you?
I'd honestly wonder if they were messing with me, Jay, or if they had some kind of neurological issue, because it's so clear. I mean, I love a good debate, I love hearing different perspectives, but on this one, I don't think there's a rational argument for Ramirez winning. It would shake my perception of their judgment, I'll tell you that much. I'd think they were just wrong, plain and simple. No offense to them.
And that's the interesting part, isn't it? Because that's the real debate happening in boxing communities worldwide, even now. Not just about Whitaker Ramirez, but about so many controversial decisions. Is boxing objective enough to have clear right and wrong answers, like a football score? Or is the sport so subjective that reasonable people can genuinely disagree on the same 4 rounds of action, or even the whole fight?
It feels like it should be objective, right? You land punches, you win rounds. You control the ring, you win rounds. But then you have these moments that make you question everything. And for Sweet Pea, it was just heartbreaking. He didn't get the official win that night, but in the court of public opinion, and in the history books of anyone who actually watched, he was the clear victor. This fight lives on as a symbol of injustice, not a victory for Ramirez.
It definitely does. The silver lining, if there is one, is that Whitaker went on to achieve greatness anyway, winning multiple world titles and cementing his legacy as one of the best ever. This loss, as devastating as it was, didn't derail his career, but it highlighted a systemic problem that boxing still grapples with today. How do we ensure fairness? How do we hold judges accountable? How do we standardize scoring without losing the art of it all?
It still happens, Jay. Maybe not as blatant as Whitaker Ramirez, but we still see decisions where you just scratch your head. And it always brings us back to that night in '88, wondering if anything has truly changed, or if we're just accepting a certain level of, let's call it human error, that might be more than just error.
Indeed. So, we've walked through the facts, we've explored the outrage, and we've touched on the lingering questions. Now it's time to turn it over to you, our incredible listeners. We want to hear from you. We've given you the full story, the different angles.
Because this isn't about what the official judges decided back then. This is about what you see when you watch the footage. We'll link to the fight in the show notes. Go watch it again if you haven't recently, or for the first time.
And tell us, who got robbed? And more importantly, why do you think the judges saw it so differently than you did? Are we all watching the same sport, or are we just seeing what we want to see? Drop your takes, your scorecards, your hot takes in the comments, or wherever you're listening.
Let's see if we can actually settle this once and for all. Spoiler alert, we probably can't. But that's what makes this so much fun, and keeps us talking about legends like Sweet Pea. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into one of boxing's most Welcome to the Squared Circle Chronicle, where we don't just talk about fights, we dissect them. And today, we're diving deep into a bout that, even decades later, still sends shivers down the spines of boxing purists. Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker versus Julio Cesar Chavez, September 10th, 1993, in San Antonio.
Oh, man, just hearing those names together, Sweet Pea and Chavez, it instantly brings up that feeling. That's the fight, isn't it? The one that's a prime example of everything wrong with the judging in this sport. A true robbery, if you ask me.
Indeed, Marcus. What's fascinating is how diametrically opposed the narratives are. You have the irrefutable data, the eyewitness accounts, the widespread condemnation from analysts. Then you have the official result, which tells a completely different story. It's like two parallel universes collided that night.
Two universes? Nah, it was one universe, and in that universe, Sweet Pea put on a clinic, a masterclass. Chavez was supposed to just steamroll him, right? He was the undefeated WBC champion, the Mexican warrior, the guy who just kept coming forward. Everyone thought it was going to be a tough night for Whitaker.
Absolutely. Chavez was 87-0 at the time, an absolute icon. Whitaker, the reigning welterweight champion, was considered an underdog by many, despite his own incredible skill set. But from the opening bell, it was clear that Sweet Pea hadn't read the script about being dominated.
He didn't just not read it, he shredded it. Whitaker was in another dimension. His footwork, his head movement, that slick, elusive style. Chavez, the relentless pressure fighter, looked utterly bewildered for large stretches of that fight. He couldn't land clean. It was like he was punching at smoke.
That's precisely it, Marcus. Whitaker's defense wasn't just about avoiding punches, it was an offensive weapon. He'd make Chavez miss, then immediately counter, often with his lightning-fast left hand. He controlled the distance, dictated the pace, and systematically dismantled Chavez's aggressive approach.
I remember watching it live and just being in awe. Every time Chavez tried to close the distance, Whitaker would just glide away, pivot, or roll under. It was frustrating to watch Chavez because you knew what he wanted to do, but Sweet Pea just wouldn't let him. It was a boxing lesson.
And the statistics back that up emphatically. CompuBox, which records punch stats, painted a very clear picture. Whitaker landed 311 punches over the 12 rounds, compared to Chavez's 220. That's a 91-punch differential, which in a championship fight is a significant margin of dominance. It's not a slight edge, it's a clear advantage.
91 punches! I mean, come on! And not only that, but Whitaker was landing the cleaner, more impactful shots, even if they weren't always power punches. He was scoring. He was making Chavez look bad. I honestly believe he won at least 9, maybe even 10 of those 12 rounds. My scorecard had him way, way ahead.
Many professional scorecards from media and analysts aligned with that assessment. Most had Whitaker winning comfortably, by at least 4 or 5 rounds. There was a strong consensus among those who understood the technical nuances of the sport that Whitaker had performed masterfully and deserved the victory.
So, here we are. The fight ends. Everyone, especially the Whitaker camp and even most of the neutral observers, are expecting Sweet Pea's hand to be raised. He just dominated the undefeated legend. What happens next is just, I don't even have words for it.
The announcement of the scorecards was truly shocking. One judge, Jack Woodruff, scored it 115-113 for Whitaker, which was a very reasonable, albeit conservative score given his performance. But then, the other two judges, Franz Martí and Jose Juan Guerra,
both scored it an inexplicable 115-115 draw.
A majority draw.
A draw! The crowd in the Alamo Dome, heavily pro-Chavez, even started booing. That tells you everything you need to know right there. When even the home crowd, who desperately wanted their guy to win, thinks the decision is garbage, you know something seriously messed up happened.
The boos were deafening, signaling a collective disbelief. Whitaker's manager, Shelley Finkel, immediately filed an official protest with the Texas Department of Licensing. It was seen universally as a travesty, a clear injustice that robbed a brilliant performance of its rightful recognition.
It wasn't just a robbery, Judge. It was a message. A message that said, no matter how good you are, no matter how much you dominate, if you're not the right guy, or if your style isn't entertaining enough, we can still take it from you. That's a dangerous precedent for the sport.
That's where the deeper implications come into play. This fight became Exhibit A for critics of boxing judging, especially concerning perceived biases towards established champions or crowd-pleasing styles. Chavez was known for his relentless, forward-marching, brawling style, which often appeals more to a casual audience than Whitaker's defensive artistry.
Yeah, but entertaining shouldn't mean ignoring who's actually winning the fight. Boxing is about hitting and not getting hit. Whitaker was the epitome of that. Chavez was just trying to hit. He was chasing shadows. How do you score that as a draw?
Some argue that judges are swayed by ringing generalship, which can be interpreted broadly. If a fighter is consistently moving forward, throwing punches, and appearing to be the aggressor, even if those punches aren't landing, some judges might subconsciously favor that perceived dominance. They might reward aggression over effective defense.
That's a cop-out, though. Effective aggression, sure. But just marching forward and whiffing? That's not scoring points. You gotta land. And the stats, the objective data, say Whitaker landed more and landed cleaner.
The controversy surrounding this decision opened a Pandora's box. Was it incompetence? Was it bias? Was there something more nefarious at play? The Texas Department of Licensing's subsequent investigation didn't find overt corruption, but the decision was still widely considered indefensible. It really highlighted the subjectivity inherent in scoring a round, even with clear criteria.
You know what, though? I think it went beyond just subjectivity. There was an undeniable narrative around Chavez at that time. He was seen as almost invincible, a national hero for Mexico. You have to wonder if there was pressure, subtle or otherwise, not to have the legendary Julio Cesar Chavez lose his zero, especially not to a slick defensive guy in front of a huge Mexican-American crowd in Texas.
That's a very real consideration, Marcus. The commercial interests, the fan expectations, the aura of an undefeated legend. These are all intangible factors that, while they shouldn't influence a judge, can certainly create an atmosphere. It puts immense pressure on those three individuals sitting ringside to make an impartial decision.
It's like they were judging a different fight, like they had their eyes closed for half of it. When you watch the footage, it's so clear. Whitaker's head movement was mesmerizing. He'd slip and slide, making Chavez look clumsy. And then pop, 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 3 shots to the body and head, and he's gone again. That's boxing brilliance right there.
His ability to make Chavez commit and miss, then capitalize on those openings, was truly exceptional. He landed the cleaner, more effective punches, controlled the ring, and managed the fight beautifully. By all objective measures of scoring a boxing match, Whitaker should have won.
Should have, but didn't. And that's the pain of it, isn't it? That a fighter can put on one of the greatest defensive masterclasses of all time, in enemy territory, against an absolute legend, and still have it snatched away by a piece of paper. It's heartbreaking.
It certainly leaves a bitter taste. Whitaker himself knew he won. He walked out of that ring with his head held high, knowing he'd done something special. The official record, however, will forever show a majority draw. And that brings us to the core of this debate, the central question that this fight continues to pose.
Which is?
Where do you, the viewer, the fan, stand? Because we've heard two completely different versions of what happened that night. One side says the evidence is irrefutable. The punch stats don't lie, the judges made mistakes, some even hint at corruption. The other side argues there's nuance, there's subjectivity, there's context that we're missing.
And honestly, that's exactly what makes boxing so divisive and so compelling. You can have two people watch the exact same 20-minute segment of pure action and come away with completely different scorecards. It's wild.
It is wild. And that's the real question we're leaving you with today. Where do you stand? Because this isn't about what the official judges decided back then. This is about what you see when you watch the footage. This is about whether you believe boxing is objective enough to have clear right and wrong answers, or whether the sport is so subjective that reasonable people can disagree on the same 4 rounds of action.
Think about this. If someone you trust completely, someone whose opinion you respect, watched this same fight and came to the opposite conclusion as you, what would that tell you? Would it change your mind, or would you think they're just wrong? Because that's the real debate happening in boxing communities worldwide right now. Every single time a controversial decision drops.
The comments section below is yours. Tell us, who got robbed? And more importantly, why do you think the judges saw it so differently than you did? Are we all watching the same sport, or are we just seeing what we want to see?
Drop your takes, your scorecards, your hot takes, and let's see if we can actually settle this once and for all. Spoiler alert, we probably can't. But hey, that's what makes boxing so much fun to talk about, right? Until next time, keep those gloves up and those scorecards honest.
Indeed. Thanks for tuning into the Squared Circle Chronicle. We'll catch you on the next round. Welcome back, fight fans, to another deep dive into the annals of boxing history, where the lines between victory and injustice blur. Today, we're not just talking about a fight. We're talking about a legend, a moment that divided the boxing world and continues to spark heated debate almost 4 decades later. We're talking Sugar Ray Leonard versus Marvelous Marvin Hagler, April 6th, 1987. Caesar's Palace, Las Vegas.
And Harrison, let me tell you, if there's one fight that still gets my blood boiling, it's this one. You had Hagler, this absolute juggernaut, the undisputed middleweight champion, a man who hadn't lost in 66 fights, dominating his division with pure, relentless aggression and power. And then you had Leonard, coming out of a 3-year retirement, eyes on the biggest prize. It was set up to be epic, and it absolutely was. Just not the way most of us expected it to end.
Absolutely, Marcus. The narrative alone was captivating. Leonard, the slick showman boxer, with incredible hand speed and footwork, coming back from a long layoff, after retinal surgery no less, to face a truly marvelous force in Hagler. The stage was set for skill versus power, grace versus grind. But what happened in the ring, and more importantly, what happened on those scorecards, etched this fight into infamy.
Infamy is right. I remember watching it live, just glued to the screen. Hagler came out like a freight train, didn't he? He was aggressive, pushing the pace, landing those heavy shots. He switched stances, he was working the body, and he just seemed to be wearing Leonard down, round after round. You felt the power, the pressure.
He did, Marcus, especially in those early rounds. Hagler established that ring generalship, pushing Leonard back, often pinning him to the ropes. And those body shots, they were brutal. You could see Leonard wince at times. But here's where the nuance comes in, and what boxing judges are supposed to look for. Leonard, despite being pressured, was often the one initiating those flurries, those quick combinations, often at the end of rounds, trying to steal them. He knew he couldn't stand toe-to-toe with Hagler for long stretches.
Stealing rounds? Come on, Harrison. You don't steal a fight from a guy like Hagler with a couple of flashy punches at the end of a round when he's been dictating the pace and landing the heavier, more significant blows for 2.5 minutes prior. That's what frustrates me. It felt like Hagler was breaking Leonard down, physically and mentally. Leonard was running, moving, trying to survive. Hagler was fighting.
And that's the core of the debate, isn't it? What constitutes effective aggression? Is it simply coming forward and throwing punches? Or is it landing those punches cleanly and making your opponent miss? Leonard's movement was often described as evasive, but it also made Hagler miss, tiring him out. And Leonard's flurries, while sometimes sporadic, were often sharp and accurate. They scored. It's a classic style clash, but the interpretation of who was more effective is where the subjectivity kicks in.
But a flurry is a flurry, Harrison. A power punch, a thudding body shot that makes a guy gasp, that's real damage. You watch that fight, and by the later rounds, Leonard looked like he'd been in a war. Hagler, while tired, still seemed like the dominant force. Most ringside observers, the old school guys, they saw Hagler winning. They saw a champion doing what a champion does, imposing his will.
And many did, Marcus. Many did. That's what makes this case so fascinating. It wasn't a unanimous outcry of robbery from everyone, even back then. There were certainly those who argued for Hagler, seeing his aggression and power as paramount. But then came the scorecards, and this is where things went from controversial to truly bewildering for many.
Bewildering. Try infuriating. Jojo Guerra's scorecard, 118 to 110 for Leonard. That's saying Leonard won 10 out of 12 rounds. 10 rounds. I mean, was he watching the same fight as everyone else? That's not a controversial scorecard. That's a statistically impossible one if you watch the fight with any objectivity. It screams conspiracy, it screams predetermined outcome, it screams something fishy is going on here.
It was certainly an outlier, Marcus, and it absolutely fueled those conspiracy theories. To suggest Leonard won 10 rounds when even Leonard himself admitted he thought it was much closer was extraordinary. It cast a shadow over the entire decision. The other judges had more defensible scorecards, one for Leonard 115 to 113, and one for Hagler 120-112. Now that 120-112 for Hagler is also quite wide, suggesting Hagler won all but 2 rounds. The disparity is stark.
It is, but the 120-112 for Hagler, while wide, at least makes sense within the context of seeing Hagler as the aggressor, the puncher, the ring general. Guerra's card? That's just, I don't know what that is. It's like he had money on Leonard winning every round. And that's why Hagler was devastated. He retired immediately, never fought again. How do you come back from a decision like that when you feel you've been so clearly robbed?
It was a career-ending moment for Hagler, no doubt. His legacy, however, remains untouched by that loss in the eyes of many. But what this fight highlights, Marcus, is that genuine expert disagreement is possible. Unlike some clear robberies where almost everyone agrees the wrong person won, with Leonard Hagler, you still have legitimate boxing historians and analysts who can mount a strong case for Leonard winning. They point to his accuracy, his speed, his defensive prowess, his ability to make Hagler miss, and those critical late-round flurries that often caught the judges' eyes.
But catching the judge's eyes shouldn't be the same as winning the fight, should it? It should be about who landed the more effective punches, who controlled the narrative of the fight. And for me, that was Hagler. He dictated the terms. Leonard was reacting, trying to survive. He was brilliant in his reactions, sure, but reacting isn't leading. It's not winning by imposing your will.
And that's the crux of our question today, isn't it? Can a controversial decision still be legitimate even when experts genuinely disagree? The rules of boxing define specific criteria: effective aggression, ring generalship, defense, clean punching. But how you weigh those criteria, especially in a razor-thin stylistic matchup like this, is inherently subjective. One judge might prioritize Hagler's relentless forward motion and bodywork. Another might prioritize Leonard's cleaner, sharper combinations and evasiveness, even if they're less frequent.
I mean, punch stats don't lie, right? Or do they? Because I know some people will bring up the punch stats and say, look, Leonard landed more, or look, Hagler landed more power punches. But even punch stats can be interpreted differently. A jab to the gloves isn't the same as a clean cross to the jaw, even if both count as a landed punch in some systems.
Exactly, Marcus. Punch stats provide data, but they don't always capture the impact or effectiveness of a punch. A glancing blow from Leonard might count the same as a thudding shot from Hagler in raw numbers, but the effect on the fighter, and implicitly on the judge's perception, is vastly different. And this is where the human element, the art of judging, comes into play, which also opens it up to criticism and human error, or even bias.
Bias. That's the word that comes to mind for a lot of people when they think about this fight. Leonard was the golden boy, the charismatic superstar, returning from retirement. Hagler was the blue-collar, no-nonsense warrior. Was there a preference, conscious or unconscious, for the storybook ending? For the superstar to make a triumphant comeback?
It's a valid question to ask, and it's one that has shadowed the sport for decades. The marketing power of a Sugar Ray Leonard win was undeniable. But to be fair, Leonard himself was a phenomenal talent. He wasn't just a pretty face. He was an Olympic gold medalist, a multi-division champion. So it wasn't like a nobody beat a champion. It was two all-time greats clashing, and one came out on the controversial side of the scorecards.
And it was that particular scorecard, the 118 to 110, that sealed it. If that card had been closer, say 115 to 113 for Hagler, and the others were what they were, maybe we'd be having a different conversation. But that card, it changed everything. It made it impossible for many to view it as a legitimate win, even if the other two cards balanced out to a split decision.
It certainly amplified the controversy. But think about it, Marcus. We've just discussed two completely different versions of what happened in the ring that night. One side says the evidence is irrefutable. Hagler's dominance, the punch stats, the immediate reactions. The other side argues there's nuance, there's subjectivity, there's context we're missing, Leonard's calculated movements, his sharp counters. And honestly, that's exactly what makes boxing so divisive and so compelling.
It's why we're still talking about it, right? 37 years later, people are still getting heated over this fight. I've had arguments with my own buddies about this, and we'll watch the tape, frame by frame, and still come to different conclusions. It's wild.
It is wild, and that brings us to the real question we're leaving you with today, our listeners. Where do you stand? Because this isn't about what the official judges decided back then. This is about what you see when you watch the footage. This is about whether you believe boxing is objective enough to have clear right and wrong answers, or whether the sport is so subjective that reasonable people can disagree on the same 4 rounds of action.
And think about this. If someone you trust completely watched this same fight and came to the opposite conclusion as you, what would that tell you? Would it change your mind, or would you think they're just wrong? Because that's the real debate happening in boxing communities worldwide right now, in every gym, every sports bar.
The comment section below is yours. Tell us, who got robbed? And more importantly, why do you think the judges saw it so differently than you did? Are we all watching the same sport, or are we just seeing what we want? Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, we're diving deep into a night that for many still feels like an open wound in the world of boxing. September 16th, 2017, T-Mobile Arena, Las Vegas. Gennady Golovkin versus Canelo Alvarez. This wasn't just a fight, it was an event, a clash of titans, and it ended up being a controversy that still echoes today. Marcus, I'm sure you remember it vividly.
Vividly, Jay. It's burned into my memory, man. That night wasn't just a robbery, it was a grand heist broadcast globally. People were ready for a classic, and we got one in the ring, absolutely. But what happened after the final bell? That's what still boils my blood. GGG, Triple G, the undefeated knockout machine, against the golden boy, Canelo. It had all the ingredients, and then, poof, disappeared into thin air, a victory snatched away.
Yeah, let's set the stage a little more for those who might be new to this or need a refresher. You had Golovkin, the Kazakh Thunder, who hadn't just been winning, he'd been destroying. Undefeated, just a force of nature, known for his power punching and that relentless pressure-fighting style. He was a middleweight king, no doubt about it. And then you have Canelo, a phenom in his own right. Incredibly skilled, fantastic head movement, sharp counterpuncher, brilliant footwork. He was the younger, perhaps more marketable star in some circles. It was supposed to be a true test for both.
Absolutely. And for 12 rounds, man, Golovkin did what Golovkin does. He was the aggressor, pushing the pace, cutting off the ring, landing those thudding power shots. Every time Canelo tried to create space, GGG was right back in his chest. You saw Canelo having moments, of course, brilliant counter shots, some slick defense, but the sustained pressure, the volume, the ring generalship, it was all GGG, round after round. He controlled the narrative of that fight, you know?
That's exactly right. And most, if not all, competent observers watching that fight, from commentators to former pros to fans at home, they were seeing Golovkin winning the majority of those rounds. The punch stats, while not the be-all and end-all, certainly supported that narrative. Golovkin was outlanding Canelo significantly, especially in power shots. It wasn't even particularly close by the numbers, you know?
Not even close. I mean, I remember watching it with a group of friends, and we were all just nodding, like, yeah, GGG is putting on a clinic here. Canelo was tough, he took a lot of shots, he definitely had his moments, don't get me wrong. He landed some beautiful counters, showed his incredible chin, but it felt like GGG was consistently dictating, consistently in charge. There was no real question in our minds who was ahead.
Imish is that. Listen. And that leads us to the moment of truth, the decision. You had Dave Moretti, who scored at 115-113 for Golovkin, which felt reasonable to many. Then Don Trella had it 114-114, a draw, which was pushing it a bit for some, but still within the realm of possibility for a close fight. But then, you had Judge Adelaide Bird's scorecard. Marcus, I still get shivers thinking about it. 118-110 for Canelo Alvarez.
Adelaide Bird. That name became instantly infamous, Jay. 118-110 for Canelo. Are you kidding me? That means she gave Canelo TEN rounds and Golovkin only TCUO. I mean, I've watched that fight back countless times, tried to see it from every angle, tried to imagine a scenario where Canelo wins 10 rounds, and it's mathematically absurd. It's an insult to intelligence, it's an insult to the sport. It's just not what happened in the ring. You'd have to be watching a completely different fight, or be completely blind.
You really would. It suggested Canelo won 10 of the 12 rounds, which is just so far removed from what anyone with even a casual understanding of boxing saw that night. The immediate reaction was just universal outrage, not just from Golovkin fans, but from boxing purists, from sports analysts, from people who just love the sport and want to see fair play. It transcended fan bias, you know? This wasn't just a close decision. It was a decision that defied reality.
Absolutely, Jay. And it wasn't just hurt feelings. This had real-world financial consequences, man. Sportsbooks in Vegas, the major international ones, they had Golovkin as a massive favorite to win going into that decision. We're talking 500. People had bet good money on GGG, thinking it was a lock. And because of that utterly baffling scorecard, the controversy was so severe that many of these sportsbooks were forced to refund hundreds of thousands of dollars in bets. Refunds. That's how egregious it was. When money starts getting pulled back because a decision is so out of whack, you know you've got a serious problem.
It truly was unprecedented in modern boxing for a score to cause such a financial ripple. It wasn't just that it was wrong, it was spectacularly wrong. It wasn't even close enough to be considered a bad night. It felt like a different universe. And this brings up the fundamental question. How does a judge, a professional judge assigned to a world title fight, submit a scorecard so utterly divorced from the actual fight? Is it sheer incompetence? Is it bias? Or is there something more sinister at play? That's what everyone started asking.
Exactly. You start hearing the whispers, don't you? Fixed fight, politics in boxing. They're protecting their golden goose. And frankly, it's hard to argue against those theories when you see something like that. It just looks so corrupt, even if you can't prove it with a smoking gun. It undermines the entire integrity of the sport. If judges can just pull numbers out of thin air, what's the point of these warriors putting their lives on the line?
And that's the danger, isn't it? When the trust in the judging system erodes, the sport itself suffers. Adelaide Bird was eventually placed on a temporary leave of absence, which was a clear acknowledgement from the Nevada State Athletic Commission that something was seriously amiss. But for many, that wasn't enough. It didn't change the official record, and it didn't give Golovkin the victory he earned. It just felt like a slap on the wrist for a monumental error that altered careers and legacies.
Totally. You know, I've seen bad decisions before. Every boxing fan has. But this one felt different. It felt personal almost, like the system was actively working against GGG, a guy who had earned everything he had through grit and power. He was the boogeyman of the middleweight division, and suddenly, he's getting held back by some utterly indefensible judging. It created this narrative, this belief, that Canelo was somehow being protected, that he was the cash cow they couldn't afford to lose to a pure knockout artist like Golovkin.
It certainly fueled that narrative, and it's a narrative that continues to haunt Canelo's career to some extent, despite his incredible accomplishments. For Golovkin, it was heartbreaking. He fought his heart out, dominated arguably the biggest fight of his career, and was denied the undisputed victory. It really highlights the subjectivity of boxing. But then again, a scorecard like Bird's pushes it beyond subjectivity into something else entirely. There's a difference between a close fight that could go either way and a scorecard that just ignores reality.
Exactly. I'm all for subjectivity, Jay. I mean, we all see fights differently, right? One person values aggression, another values defense, another values clean punching. But there are limits. If you value Canelo's head movement and counterpunching to the point where you ignore GGG's consistent pressure, body shots, and ring control for 10 rounds, you're not judging the fight. You're just not watching it at all. It's like watching a football game and saying the team that punted on every down won because their punter had good hang time. It just doesn't make sense.
It's a great analogy, Marcus, and it really captures the frustration. This decision wasn't just a singular event. It had a cascading effect. It almost made the rematch inevitable, didn't it? The demand was so high because everyone felt cheated out of a clear winner. But even then, the controversy continued with the second fight, which many also felt Golovkin won, only for Canelo to get the majority decision. It further cemented that idea in many people's minds that GGG was getting a raw deal.
Oh, absolutely. The first fight set the stage for years of what-ifs and they robbed him. And the rematch? That was another whole can of worms, though not quite as blatant as Bird's card, but it just added fuel to the fire. It made people suspicious, it made them distrustful, and it created this narrative that GGG, this humble, powerful, genuine guy, was up against more than just Canelo in the ring. He was up against the system, the politics, the money-making machine of boxing. It's a sad state of affairs when you feel that way about a sport you love.
It definitely is. And that's what makes this particular case study 7 Foot so compelling. It's not just about who won or lost. It's about the erosion of faith in the process. We're left with this lingering question. How can there be such a vast disconnect between what the vast majority of trained eyes see and what an official judge records? Is it that some judges truly have such a wildly different interpretation of the scoring criteria? Or is it something more insidious? Something that hints at external pressures or biases, conscious or unconscious?
I think it's a mix, honestly. I think there are judges who are just flat out incompetent, and that's terrifying. But I also think there's immense pressure in these big fights, especially when one fighter is the money man. It's easy to sway towards the favorite without even realizing it, or worse, with full intent. And that's why this fight, this exact scorecard, is so critical. It blew the lid off that conversation. It forced people to confront the darker side of boxing that many tried to ignore.
And it makes you wonder if we're all truly watching the same sport. Because you have those who defend Bird, saying she valued Canelo's cleaner shots or defense more. But when the consensus is so overwhelmingly against a particular score, it just makes you question the very foundation of judging. It brings us back to that core idea of subjectivity versus objectivity in a combat sport. Can there be a right answer, or are we always going to be at the mercy of individual interpretation?
I think there can be a right answer, Jay, especially in fights where one fighter clearly dominates the key scoring criteria. Rounds are scored individually. You're looking for effective aggression, defense, clean punching, ring generalship. And GGG, in that first fight, checked off more boxes more consistently. It's not about being a fan of one guy or the other. It's about seeing what's happening. And what happened on Adelaide Bird's card was just, it was malpractice. It was indefensible. And that's why we're still talking about it years later, still feeling that sense of injustice.
It left a stain, didn't it? A stain on the fight itself and on the integrity of the sport for many. It sparked investigations, renewed calls for judging reform, and really put a spotlight on the often opaque world of boxing commissions and their appointed officials. It forced a conversation that needed to happen, even if the resolution wasn't satisfying for everyone involved.
Definitely. It's like when you go to a restaurant, you expect to get the food you ordered, right? You don't expect them to bring you a completely different meal and tell you it's what you wanted. That's what that score...
Welcome back to Ringside Rulings, where we're not afraid to tackle the toughest calls in boxing history. Today, we're diving headfirst into a controversy that, honestly, still sends shivers down the spines of fight fans. Lennox Lewis versus Evander Holyfield, March 13th, 1999.
Shivers, Harrison? I'd say more like a burning rage. It wasn't just a controversial decision. It was, for many, the ultimate robbery. You talk about tough calls. This wasn't tough. It was blatant. Lennox Lewis, undisputed heavyweight champion, completely dominating Evander Holyfield, and somehow it ends in a draw. How do you even begin to explain that?
Well, Marcus, you're not wrong about the outrage. And believe me, as someone who appreciates the technical craft of boxing, it's hard to look at that fight and not feel a sense of injustice for Lewis. But let's set the stage for our listeners who might not remember the specifics. This was a massive unification bout at Madison Square Garden. Two legends, both champions, squaring off to determine the true king of the heavyweights.
And it should have been Lewis's coronation. From the very first bell, he established his dominance. His jab, Harrison, that jab was a piston. It kept Holyfield at bay, snapped his head back, controlled the distance. Holyfield, bless his warrior heart, kept trying to get inside, but Lewis was just too big, too skilled, too mobile. He was dictating everything.
You could see the game plan playing out perfectly for Lewis. He used his height, his incredible reach, his footwork. He was landing the cleaner, more effective punches round after round. Holyfield, ever the real deal, had his moments of grit and determination, pushing forward, but they were isolated. Lewis was racking up rounds clearly.
Exactly. If you watch that fight, round by round, it was Lewis. Punch stats backed it up. The eye test backed it up. Even Jim Lampley on HBO was beside himself. He called it an outrage, a highway robbery. And when Jim Lampley says something like that, you know it's bad. This wasn't a close fight. This was a clinic.
And that brings us to the scorecards, which are truly the heart of this enduring controversy. Judge Stanley Christodoulou, bless him, scored at 117-112 for Lewis, giving Holyfield only 3 rounds. That, in my professional opinion, felt right. It reflected what we saw unfold.
That's how every rational human being watching that fight saw it. That's how it should have been. But then you have Judge Larry O'Connell, who somehow saw it as a 114-114 draw. A draw. How do you even get to a draw in that fight, Harrison? It baffles me.
A draw is certainly a stretch, but if you're looking for competitive rounds, perhaps you could argue a few swing rounds Holyfield's way if you really stretched the definition of effective aggression or ring generalship when he was trying to press the action. But the real head-scratcher, the score that cemented this fight's place in infamy, was Judge Gene Williams.
Gene Williams. Don't even get me started. A 115-113 victory for Holyfield. A victory, meaning she thought Holyfield won at least 6 rounds, maybe even 7. I've watched that fight dozens of times, and I honestly can't find 6 rounds for Holyfield. It's beyond comprehension. It's an insult to the sport.
And the fallout was immediate and severe. New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani publicly stated he was embarrassed on behalf of the city. The outcry wasn't just from passionate boxing fans. It was from officials, commentators, everyone who saw the fight live. It was an institutional black eye for the sport.
Rightfully so. It made boxing look corrupt, incompetent, rigged. How can you have an undisputed champion who so clearly dominates a fight and then walk away without the belts? It completely undermined the integrity of the title. And then, the kicker, the absolute shocker.
Gene Williams' admission. This is where it gets incredibly complicated, Marcus. She later admitted, publicly, that her view was obstructed by ringside photographers. She stated that had she seen the fight clearly, her revised scorecard would have been a draw.
A draw! Even her revised score was a draw. Which means, by her own admission, Lewis should have been the undisputed champion. If her revised score was a draw, and Christodoulou had Lewis winning, that would have been a majority decision for Lewis. She messed it up so badly she admitted it, and even then, she still couldn't bring herself to score it for Lewis outright.
It raises the critical question, doesn't it? Should a judge's admission of error after the fact change the historical record? Because that's what we're wrestling with here. We have the official result, a majority draw, etched into history. But we also have a judge saying, I got it wrong, my view was obstructed.
Absolutely, it should change the historical record. If a judge says, I couldn't see, or I made a mistake, how can that stand? That's not a subjective opinion. That's an admission of not performing the job correctly. It's like a referee admitting they missed a foul that changed the outcome of a basketball game. You can't just shrug and say, oh well, history is history. Justice wasn't served.
I hear you, Marcus, and on a moral level, I agree that it feels like justice was denied. But think about the precedent that sets. Where do you draw the line? Does every judge's Monday morning quarterbacking get to rewrite the history books? We rely on a snapshot, a judgment in real time, in the moment. The decision is rendered, and it stands. If we start overturning decisions based on later admissions, we open a Pandora's box. Does Holyfield then get his record changed? Does Lewis get an extra win? It gets messy very quickly.
Messy? It's already messy. The current record is a stain on the sport. We're talking about a world title fight, a unification bout. The stakes couldn't be higher, and a judge's admitted physical obstruction directly contributed to a monumental error. This isn't just about a judge having a bad night, it's about a procedural failure. The fix for this isn't to pretend it didn't happen, it's to acknowledge the truth.
But what is the truth in boxing, Marcus? This is where the whole debate between objectivity and subjectivity comes in. You mentioned punch stats, and yes, they're a valuable tool. Lewis landed more, he was more accurate. But do punch stats tell the whole story of who won a round? What about ring generalship, defensive prowess, effective aggression that doesn't always register as a clean punch? One judge might prioritize Holyfield's constant forward pressure, even if he wasn't landing as much, seeing it as effective aggression controlling the pace.
Come on, Harrison, that's stretching it. Lewis was moving, making Holyfield miss, then popping him with that jab. He was controlling the ring, yes, but he was also controlling the pace and landing the better shots. That's the definition of ring generalship and effective aggression combined. You can't just be effectively aggressive if you're swinging at air and getting tagged yourself. The stats, the visual evidence, the commentary, it all points one way. Jean Williams' card was an outlier, and she admitted she couldn't see.
I understand the frustration, truly. And the argument that evidence is irrefutable, especially with the punch stats, is compelling. But there's a difference between a judge's interpretation of a round, which is inherently subjective, and a judge admitting a physical obstruction that prevented them from seeing the action. The latter, to me, is a more clear-cut case of an invalid judgment process, not just a differing opinion. However, the system is designed so that once the decision is rendered, it's final. It's about protecting the integrity of the live event, no matter how flawed.
Protecting the integrity, it eroded the integrity. It made a mockery of championship boxing. This incident, for so many fans, solidified the perception that boxing was rigged, or at the very least, woefully mismanaged. And that's a perception the sport has struggled with for decades. If you have clear evidence of a mistake, an admitted mistake, and you don't correct it, what does that say about your commitment to fairness?
It's a tough balance, because on one hand, you want accountability and accuracy. On the other, you want finality. Imagine if every sports outcome could be retrospectively changed because of a player's or official's later admission. The entire fabric of competition could unravel. What we saw in the aftermath, of course, was the immediate demand for a rematch, and thankfully, that rematch happened fairly quickly.
And Lewis dominated that one too, and actually got the decision. That second fight, in Vegas, was his chance for vindication, and he took it. But even that doesn't erase the injustice of the first fight. It's like saying, well, we eventually got it right. That's not how it works when championships are on the line and legacies are being defined. That first decision is still on his record. It's still part of the historical narrative, and it shouldn't be.
It doesn't erase it, but it certainly provided a measure of closure for Lewis and his fans. But the first fight remains a symbol of judging incompetence at the highest levels, a stark reminder of how fragile the outcome of a fight can be when left in the hands of fallible humans. And it's this very fragility that makes boxing so compelling, so maddening, and so endlessly debatable.
Compelling, yes. Maddening, absolutely. But debatable, to a point. The evidence for Lewis winning that first fight is overwhelming. It's not just a difference of opinion when a judge admits she couldn't properly do her job. That's a fundamental flaw, and it left Lewis, the undisputed champion, without a clear, deserved victory.
So here's what we've heard, Marcus. Two completely different versions of what happened in the ring that night. One side says the evidence is irrefutable. The punch stats don't lie. The judges admitted their mistakes. The investigations proved corruption. The other side argues there's nuance. There's subjectivity. All right, Marcus. We've talked about a lot of controversy moments in sports, but today we're diving into what I honestly believe is the single most egregious, most blatant, and frankly, most infuriating decision in the history of amateur boxing. We're talking about the 1988 Seoul Olympics, Roy Jones Jr., and that gold medal final.
Harrison, egregious is an understatement. Outrageous, disgraceful, a travesty of justice. Those are the words that even begin to scratch the surface. This wasn't just a bad decision. This was a mugging in broad daylight, witnessed by the entire world. Roy Jones Jr. versus Park Si-hun, a fight that literally changed boxing forever, and not in a good way at the time.
You know, before we even get into the fight itself, let's set the stage for Roy Jones Jr. leading up to that final. He wasn't just good, he was a phenomenon. He was a complete package, a force of nature in that tournament. Undefeated, demolishing opponents with speed, power, and finesse. He was the future of boxing, and everyone knew it.
Absolutely. I mean, 4 opponents before the final, right? And not just wins, but dominant performances. He hadn't lost a round, barely broken a sweat. He was like a cheat code in human form. His previous fights were spectacles. He was doing things in the ring that amateur boxers just weren't supposed to be able to do. The hype was real. The talent was undeniable. He was a lock for gold.
Exactly. He came into that final against Park Si-hun, the hometown hero, with an aura of invincibility. And then the bell rings, and the fight starts, and it's just more of the same, isn't it? From the opening bell, Roy Jones Jr. was in complete control. I mean, he was dancing, he was slipping punches, he was landing at will. It was a masterclass.
A masterclass is right. Park Si-hun, bless his heart, he was there, he was trying, but he was completely outmatched. He couldn't land anything significant. Jones was peppering him, landing clean shots, combinations, moving in and out like it was a sparring session. It wasn't a competitive fight. At any point, if you were watching, you'd think, okay, this is going exactly as expected. Jones is cruising to gold.
What makes this so objectively indefensible, Marcus, is that we aren't just relying on eye test here. We have the numbers. The punch statistics from that fight are etched in infamy. Roy Jones Jr. outlanded Park 86-32. 86 punches to 32. That's not just a differential. That's a beatdown. That's a statistical massacre in a sport where every punch counts.
86-32. Think about that for a second. That's a 3-1 advantage in landed punches. In boxing, if you outland your opponent 2-1, it's considered dominant. 3-1 is unheard of in a gold medal final. And it wasn't like Park's 32 punches were power shots that buckled Jones. They were mostly glancing blows, or blocked. Jones was barely touched.
And it gets worse. In the third round, Jones landed 36 punches to Park's 2. 2! How do you score that round for the guy who landed 2 punches? You just can't. It defies logic, it defies mathematics, it defies the basic rules of boxing scoring.
You can't. It's impossible. And that's where the robbery part comes in. Everyone watching, from the commentators to the fans in the arena to the global audience at home, knew what was happening. We were watching a virtuoso performance. Then the decision comes in, 3-2, for Park Si-hun.
Just saying it out loud still sends a chill down my spine. 3 judges out of 5 inexplicably voted for Park, 2 for Jones. The silence, then the collective gasp, then the boos. It wasn't just the American contingent who were outraged, it was universally condemned. Even Park Si-hun himself looked stunned, almost embarrassed when his hand was raised. He knew he didn't win.
He knew it! He actually apologized to Jones later, Harrison. Think about that. The guy who was awarded the gold medal felt compelled to apologize to the guy he beat. That tells you everything you need to know about the legitimacy of that decision. That's not sportsmanship. That's an acknowledgement of a colossal injustice.
And the immediate aftermath was pure chaos. The American team lodged an official protest, which was dismissed, of course. But the controversy wouldn't die down. It couldn't. This wasn't a close call. It was an objective travesty. And that's when the investigation started, right?
That's when the curtain started to peel back and the ugliness came out. The International Olympic Committee's investigation revealed what everyone suspected. The judges who voted for Park had been wined and dined by Korean Olympic organizers. That's the polite way of saying it, Harrison. We're talking bribery. We're talking collusion. We're talking about fixing a gold medal fight on the biggest amateur stage in the world.
It's sickening, honestly. To think that athletes dedicate their entire lives, make incredible sacrifices, only for their dreams to be stolen by backroom deals and corrupt officials. It stripped away the very essence of what the Olympics are supposed to represent. fair play, athletic excellence, and honest competition.
Exactly. It makes you wonder how many other questionable decisions throughout Olympic history might have similar stories lurking beneath the surface. But this one was so obvious, so blatant, that it couldn't be ignored. The lopsided stats, the universal condemnation, the fact that even the winner seemed to know he'd been given a gift, it all converged.
And it wasn't just a brief scandal. This event, this single fight, sparked international outrage and eventually led to significant reforms in amateur boxing. The scoring system was changed. They went from the old round-by-round points to a computerized punch-counting system to try and eliminate this kind of subjective and clearly corrupt judging. It was a direct response to the Roy Jones Jr. robbery.
A necessary evil, in a way. It's a shame that it took such a monumental injustice to force change, but change it did. Though, as we know, even those computerized systems had their flaws. But the intention was to prevent another Seoul 88. It became the gold standard, ironically, for what a boxing robbery truly means. Anytime a fighter gets a bad decision, people reference Roy Jones Jr.
It truly became the benchmark, and for Roy Jones Jr., it was a moment that could have broken a lesser man. But instead, he went on to have one of the most incredible professional careers in boxing history. Four-division world champion, undisputed champion, pound-for-pound king. He proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that he was indeed the better fighter, the true gold medalist of that tournament.
He took that injustice and he channeled it. He used it as fuel, and that's commendable. But it doesn't erase the stain on the Olympic legacy, does it? It doesn't erase the fact that he was robbed of that moment, that medal, that recognition on the amateur stage. It's a part of his story for sure, but it's a dark chapter for sports in general.
It really is. And you know, looking back, the arguments for Park Si-hun winning, they just don't exist. There's no legitimate boxing authority, no credible analyst, no statistician who can look at that fight and say, yeah, Park deserved that. It was a politically manipulated scorecard, mathematically indefensible.
I've tried, Harrison. I've genuinely tried to find a defense, to put myself in the shoes of those three judges, to see it from a different angle, and I just can't. You'd have to completely ignore the fight itself, ignore the punch stats, ignore the fundamental principles of how boxing is scored. You'd have to believe that a fighter who's outlanded 3-1 is somehow more effective or more aggressive, which is just absurd in this context.
Right. It wasn't even a style point situation where maybe one guy was technically brilliant but didn't land as much. Jones was both technically brilliant and landing significantly more. Park was just trying to survive. So the only conclusion, the only logical conclusion, is that external factors were at play. And that's what the IOC eventually confirmed, even if they didn't overturn the decision.
And that's the kicker, isn't it? Even with the evidence, the decision stood. Because once you open that Pandora's box, where do you stop? How many Olympic decisions do you go back and review? So for the sake of stability, the injustice was allowed to stand, but it came at a huge cost to the integrity of the sport and the games.
It really did. It's a harsh reminder that even at the highest levels of amateur sport, corruption can rear its ugly head and steal dreams. But it's also a testament to human resilience, isn't it? Roy Jones Jr. didn't let it define him negatively. He overcame it, soared to even greater heights, and left no doubt about his greatness.
Yeah, he did. He showed the world what a true champion looks like, even when he's had his moment stolen. The 1988 Seoul Olympics will always be remembered for that shocking decision. But it's also a story of a legendary boxer who refused to be defined by a corrupt system. And that, I think, is the lasting takeaway. You can rig the scorecards, but you can't rig destiny.
Well said, Marcus. A truly unforgettable, if frustrating moment in sports history. And one that hopefully continues to serve as a stark warning against anything less than absolute integrity in competition. Thanks for revisiting this with me.
Anytime, Harrison. This one needed to be talked about, again and again, until we never forget what happened that day. Until next time, everyone.
Welcome back to the Squared Circle debate, everyone. Tonight, we're diving deep into a fight that 8 years later still sparks arguments at every boxing fan gathering, every bar, every sports show. We're talking May 2nd, 2015, MGM Grand, Las Vegas. Floyd Money Mayweather Jr. versus Manny Pac-Man Pacquiao. The fight of the century. Marcus, the air in Vegas that night, you could just cut it with a knife, couldn't you?
Cut it with a knife? Jay, you could have built a whole new casino with the tension. I mean, this wasn't just a fight. This was the fight. The one everyone had been begging for years. The undefeated defensive genius against the whirlwind power-punching aggressor. The hype was stratospheric, and the anticipation unbearable.
Absolutely. And then the fight happened. And for a lot of people, what they saw didn't quite live up to that insane hype, but it definitely lived up to the controversy. Because officially, the judges gave Floyd Mayweather a unanimous decision victory. 118 to 110, 116 112, 116 112. Clear as day on the scorecards, right?
Clear as mud, Jay. Clear as mud. I remember watching it live, screaming at the TV, and then those scorecards came out, and I thought, are they watching the same fight I am? I mean, 118, 110, that's almost a shutout. It implied Mayweather dominated every single round, and anyone with eyes could tell you that wasn't the case.
Well, let's look at the numbers, Marcus, because numbers don't lie, right? CompuBox, the official punch statistics, showed Floyd landed 67 more punches than Manny, 148 to 81, and his accuracy was significantly better, 34% compared to Pacquiao's 19%. From a purely statistical standpoint, that's a pretty compelling argument for Mayweather's victory.
CompuBox? Come on, Jay. CompuBox is a tool, not the gospel. It counts every jab, every tap. What about the quality of those punches? What about the impact? You're telling me a Mayweather tap, tap, tap running around the ring is equal to a Pacquiao power shot that's pushing Mayweather back, even if it's glancing? That's where the stats lose me. Pacquiao was the one pressing the action, he was the aggressor, he was throwing with bad intentions.
And this, right here, is the crux of the debate, isn't it? The quality punch versus effective aggression. As judges, we're supposed to score based on 4 criteria: effective aggression, ring generalship, defense, and clean, effective punching. Now, while Pacquiao was aggressive, many argue that a lot of that aggression was either blocked or didn't land cleanly enough to be effective. Mayweather, on the other hand, was landing his counter shots with precision, even if they were fewer in number.
For the fighter's intent, Jay, you can't just ignore that. Manny came to fight. He came to knock Mayweather out. He put Mayweather on the back foot at times. He pushed the pace. You can't win a fight just by pot-shotting and running, can you? That's not what boxing is supposed to be about for the fans. We want to see a fight, not a chess match where one player keeps moving their pieces out of danger.
Well, for a judge, running is often interpreted as excellent defense and movement, making your opponent miss. And landing clean, effective punches, even fewer of them, is exactly what scores points. It's not about who looks like they're trying harder, it's about who's doing more damage and controlling the narrative within the rules. Mayweather dictated where the fight took place, he stifled Pacquiao's angles, and he landed his sharp counters.
Dictated. He evaded. He tied him up. Look, I've rewatched that fight countless times, and I see rounds where Manny clearly dictated the pace, clearly landed the more telling blows. Rounds 4, 6, 9, those were Pacquiao's rounds hands down. You can't tell me those were scored for Floyd just because he blocked a few jabs on his elbows. And the impact on Floyd, you saw him grimace sometimes. You saw him take a step back. Those don't get counted by CompuBox.
It's true that the subtle reactions aren't always reflected in raw numbers. But judges are trained to look beyond just the perceived aggression. They're looking for clean breaks, balance, and the effect of the punch. Mayweather's defense was, as always, surgical. He made Pacquiao miss a lot, and that frustrates an aggressive fighter. When Pacquiao did get in, Floyd would often smother him, tying him up, disrupting his rhythm. That's part of the game.
Part of the game or part of the problem? I just feel like Mayweather played a game that prioritized not getting hit over actually hurting his opponent, and the judges rewarded that. It's frustrating for fans who want to see explosive action. And then you throw in the whole IV scandal, Jay. That just makes it even harder to swallow.
Ah, the IV controversy. That certainly added another layer of mud to the waters. For those who don't remember, after the fight, it was revealed that Floyd Mayweather had received an unauthorized IV infusion the day before the fight. USADA, the U.S. anti-doping agency, retroactively cleared him, stating it was for dehydration and vitamin deficiencies and didn't contain any banned substances. But here's the kicker. It was given without the Nevada State Athletic Commission's prior approval.
Exactly. Without approval. It doesn't matter what was in it. The fact that he used it covertly, circumventing the rules, that's just shady. It immediately casts a shadow of doubt. Was it just for vitamins, or was it to rehydrate after an aggressive weight cut that he might not have been able to recover from naturally? It gives the impression that he needed an unfair advantage, whether real or perceived, to beat Manny. And that, for me, just taints the entire victory.
It's a valid point about the optics, Marcus. The process wasn't followed, and in a sport so heavily scrutinized for fairness and integrity, that's a problem. Even if it was deemed medically harmless after the fact, the lack of transparency beforehand fueled every conspiracy theory and every robbery claim. It certainly didn't help Mayweather's image with the skeptical fans.
Help his image? It solidified it. It showed that he's willing to bend the rules to win. And Manny, bless his heart, he still claims victory years later. And you know what? I believe him. I truly believe he feels he won that fight. And I think a lot of people who watched it with their hearts, not just with a scorecard, felt the same way.
And that's the beauty and the frustration of boxing, isn't it? It's a sport where subjectivity is woven into its very fabric. You can have all the CompuBox stats in the world, all the official scorecards, and still, someone watching with a different lens, a different set of priorities, will come to a completely different conclusion. It begs the question, are we all watching the same sport, or are we just seeing what we want to see?
Exactly. If I'm judging, I'm looking for the fighter who's trying to finish the fight, not just survive it. I'm looking for effective blows, yes, but also the fighter who's showing more courage, more heart, more willingness to engage. And in that fight, Manny Pacquiao was that fighter. He was limited by a shoulder injury, which only came out later, but he was still pushing.
The shoulder injury is another huge factor, and it definitely adds to the what-if narrative. Pacquiao claimed he had a torn rotator cuff that limited his right hand, a key weapon against Mayweather's defense. Whether that played a significant role, or if it was an excuse, is another layer of the debate. But it does make you wonder how different the fight might have been with a fully healthy Pac-Man.
It makes me think he still won with one arm. Honestly, the more I think about it, the more I get fired up. This fight wasn't just about punch totals, it was about who left more of an impression, who fought with more urgency. And if you ask me, Manny did. He put Mayweather in uncomfortable positions more often than Mayweather put Manny in uncomfortable positions. That counts for something.
It certainly counts for fan perception, Marcus. And that's where the subjective element really comes into play. For the casual viewer, the aggression, the movement forward, the perceived power can often overshadow the cleaner, more technical work of a defensive master. Mayweather's style, while incredibly effective, isn't always fan-friendly in the way Pacquiao's is.
And that's why this fight continues to infuriate me and so many others. We were promised the fight of the century, and we got a clinic in defensive boxing that was ultimately rewarded, despite, in my humble opinion, the guy who truly came to fight giving more. It was a tactical victory for Floyd, yes, but a moral victory for Manny, and a controversial decision in the history books.
So we're left with this enduring question, aren't we? Was it a clear win for Floyd, backed by statistics and sound boxing principles? Or was it a subtle robbery, where the heart and aggression of Manny Pacquiao deserved more recognition? Where do you stand, folks? Because this isn't just about what the official judges decided back then, or even what Marcus and I think now.
This is about what you see when you watch the footage. This is about whether you believe boxing is objective enough to have clear right and wrong answers, or whether the sport is so subjective that reasonable people can disagree on the same 12 rounds of action. Because trust me, we've had this debate with people we trust, and they've come to the opposite conclusion. Does that change your mind, or do you think they're just wrong?
Exactly. We want to hear your takes, your scorecards, your hot takes, even your conspiracy theories about the IV. Drop them in the comments. Tell us, who got robbed? And more importantly, why do you think the judges saw it so differently than you did? Are we all watching the same sport, or are we just seeing what we want to see? Let's keep this debate going.
Yeah, because let's be honest, we're probably not going to settle this once and for all. But that's what makes boxing, and this fight specifically, so damn fun to talk about. Thanks for tuning into the Squared Circle debate, everyone. We appreciate you engaging with us.
Welcome, fight fans, to the scorecard. Tonight, Marcus and I are diving deep into a fight that still sparks heated debate whenever its name comes up. We're talking May 5th, 2007, Las Vegas, a WBC super middleweight title bout that promised fireworks, but delivered a controversy that echoed for years. Marcus, you've seen your share of questionable decisions, but where does De La Hoya versus Sturm rank for you?
Jay, honestly, it's right up there at the top of the what were they watching list. When I think of daylight robbery in boxing, that fight against Felix Sturm, the golden boy Oscar De La Hoya's win, it makes my blood boil, man. It wasn't even close to my eyes. And I know I'm not alone in feeling that way.
You're absolutely not. For those who might not remember or are new to this particular chapter of boxing history, Oscar De La Hoya was, at this point, an absolute legend. The Golden Boy, a multi-division champion, an icon. Felix Sturm, a solid German middleweight, not as well known on the global stage, but a very disciplined and skilled fighter in his own right. The stage was set, the bright lights of Vegas, and the expectation was high. De La Hoya was expected to roll, wasn't he?
Absolutely. That's the narrative that was pushed. Oscar was the superstar, the cash cow, the one heading for that mega fight with Floyd Mayweather. Sturm was seen as a tune-up, a stepping stone, a guy who'd give a decent account of himself maybe, but ultimately succumb to the Golden Boy machine. But someone forgot to tell Felix Sturm that script, didn't they? Because what we saw in that ring was a completely different story.
They certainly did. From the very first round, it felt different. Sturm came out with a game plan, and he executed it beautifully. What struck me, rewatching it, was his defensive mastery. He was elusive, he was slick, and he made De La Hoya miss a lot. And when he wasn't making him miss, he was landing his own shots. Clean, sharp jabs and right hands.
His ring control was phenomenal, Jay. Sturm wasn't just reacting, he was dictating the pace and the distance. He was moving, pivoting, stifling De La Hoya's aggression. You saw Oscar getting frustrated. His punches weren't landing with their usual snap, and Sturm was just too damn smooth. It was a clinic, plain and simple, from a fighter who was supposed to be a warm-up act. He was outboxing De La Hoya, making him look ordinary in there.
And that's the key term, outboxing. It wasn't a brawl, it wasn't a slugfest where you could argue about who landed the harder shots. This was a technical exhibition from Sturm. He was landing more, cleaner, more effective punches. He was controlling the center of the ring, forcing De La Hoya to chase. He kept Oscar off balance, never letting him settle into a rhythm. This wasn't a performance where you could point to any significant damage being done to Sturm either. He looked fresh, composed, almost serene through most of it.
No kidding! Oscar's face was showing the wear and tear more than Sturm's. I remember thinking, if this fight goes to the cards, there's no way Sturm loses. I mean, based on what my eyes were telling me and what the criteria for scoring are, effective aggression, ring generalship, defense, hard and clean punches, Sturm was winning almost every single round. Maybe De La Hoya snuck one or two, but it felt like 10 rounds to 2 or 9-3 at absolute worst for Sturm.
Precisely, which brings us to the moment of truth. The final bell rings, everyone's buzzing, the crowd is a mix of awe at Sturm's performance and maybe a little confusion for De La Hoya's. And then Michael Buffer gets on the mic, and the scores are read. It was a split decision, Marcus. One judge had it 115-113 for Sturm, but the other two judges 115-113 for Oscar De La Hoya. A split decision victory for the Golden Boy. That announcement, I tell you, you could feel the air go out of the arena and then a collective gasp of disbelief.
Disbelief? Try pure outrage. I was screaming at the TV, man. 115-113 for De La Hoya? Are you kidding me? That means they gave him 7 rounds. 7 rounds. When did Oscar win 7 rounds in that fight? He looked lost for significant portions of it. Sturm was just too slick, too fast, too smart. You know what, Jay? I rewatched that fight countless times over the years, and every single time I come to the same conclusion. It was a travesty, a blatant injustice. Sturm was robbed blind.
I mean, Felix Sturm's reaction post-fight, it speaks volumes. He was absolutely fuming, calling it a robbery. And he wasn't wrong. He was visibly distraught, and rightfully so. He'd just put on the performance of his life against a boxing legend on the biggest stage and had it snatched away. Can you imagine the emotional toll of something like that? The pride, the effort, the sacrifice, all invalidated by 2 scorecards that seem to exist in a different dimension.
That's why these decisions hurt so much, Jay. It's not just a fight. It's someone's career, someone's legacy. Sturm went in there, proved he belonged, proved he could beat one of the all-time greats, and then he's told, nope, sorry, the judges saw something else. It's infuriating. And you know, this wasn't an isolated incident for De La Hoya either, was it? ESPN's Dan Rafael, a man who's seen more fights than most, even pointed out that there's always been much debate about the outcome of some of De La Hoya's fights. This one just happens to be one of the clearest examples.
That's a critical point, Marcus. While we're focusing on Sturm, it does fit a pattern. The Golden Boy had a reputation, fairly or unfairly, for sometimes getting the nod in close, or even not-so-close fights. Whether it was due to his star power, the sheer revenue he generated, or perhaps a subconscious bias from judges, it's hard to say definitively. But the perception was there. And this fight against Sturm only solidified that perception for many.
Perception? It was reality, Jay. I mean, let's talk about specific rounds. Can we honestly find 7 rounds where Oscar De La Hoya was the clear winner? I struggled to find even 5. Sturm's jab was a thing of beauty. He was popping it out, snapping Oscar's head back, establishing distance. He used his feet constantly, creating angles, never staying in one place for Oscar to plant his feet and unleash those power hooks. Oscar was lunging, missing, looking increasingly desperate.
I agree. If we break it down round by round, Sturm was simply more effective. The scoring criteria emphasize clean punching, effective aggression, defense, and ring generalship. Sturm excelled in all but perhaps effective aggression if you're looking for knockout blows, but even then, his aggression was effective in racking up points. De La Hoya's aggression often translated to chasing Sturm around and hitting air. His defense was breached by Sturm's sharp counters. It really makes you wonder what metrics those two judges were using.
They were probably looking at Oscar's shiny shorts, Jay. Or the crowd reaction for Oscar's misses. I mean, this isn't to diminish De La Hoya's incredible career, but this particular fight, it's a stain. It's a blatant example of how the business side of boxing can sometimes overshadow the sport itself. There was a narrative, Oscar was going to fight Mayweather, and Sturm was not part of that narrative. So, the narrative won, and Sturm lost, unfairly.
It's a really tough pill to swallow for purists of the sport. We talk about the integrity of boxing, and then fights like this happen, and it just erodes confidence in the judging system. Sturm himself said, "I got robbed." And there's little, if any, credible argument against that. The stats, the eye test, the general consensus among objective observers all point to a Sturm victory.
Exactly. You didn't see anyone outside of Oscar's most ardent, rose-tinted glasses-wearing fans genuinely arguing he won that fight. Not unbiased analysts, not commentators, nobody who knew what they were looking at. It was a masterclass from Sturm, a tactical, defensive, punching-on-the-move masterclass that deserved the nod. And it didn't get it.
It's a testament to Sturm's character, I think, that he continued to have a very successful career despite this. He went on to become a multiple-time world champion at middleweight. But you have to wonder what a win over De La Hoya at that point in his career would have done for him. It would have catapulted him into superstardom in the U.S., cemented his legacy even further. He was denied that moment, that recognition.
It's a huge what if. What if Sturm gets that decision? Does he get the big money fights? Does his name carry more weight? Absolutely he does. He beat Oscar De La Hoya, the golden boy, in his prime. That's a huge scalp. But instead, he's left with the bitter taste of injustice. And Oscar, well, he moved on to the Mayweather fight, collecting another massive payday with this controversial win tucked under his belt.
And that's why it's so important for us to keep discussing these moments, Marcus, to highlight when the system fails, to ensure that the fighters who put everything on the line get the fair shake they deserve. Because at the end of the day, boxing is a sport, but it's also a business, and sometimes the business side casts a long, unfair shadow over the integrity of the competition.
Preach, Jay, preach! My final assessment on De La Hoya versus Sturm is unequivocal. Clear robbery. No two ways about it. Sturm's performance warranted the victory, his ring control, his defensive prowess, his ability to land cleaner, more impactful punches, they all pointed to him being the rightful winner. The Golden Boy got a gift that night, plain and simple.
And on that decisive note, we wrap up another edition of the Scorecard. It's always fascinating, and sometimes frustrating, to revisit these moments in boxing history. Felix Sturm versus Oscar De La Hoya, May 5th, 2007, a fight that remains etched in the minds of many as one of boxing's most questionable decisions. Thank you for joining us, Marcus, and thank you all for listening. Until next time, keep fighting the good fight, and let's hope for fair judging in every bout.
You got it, Jay. And remember, keep your eyes open, because sometimes what they tell you isn't what's real. See ya.
Welcome back to the Ring Report, folks. And what a report we have today. Marcus, I still feel like we're sifting through the dust from May 20th. Haney versus Lomachenko, the undisputed lightweight championship. I mean, wow. Just wow. My head is still spinning from the aftermath of that fight.
Judge, spinning is an understatement. I think the entire boxing world is still trying to figure out what they saw, what they heard, and what the judges actually scored. I've been in the game a long time, and I'm telling you, this one still feels raw. People are genuinely upset, on both sides, to be honest.
Raw is a good word for it. Let's just lay it out there for anyone who might have been living under a rock. Devin Haney won by unanimous decision. The scores were 116-112, 115-113, and 115-113. And immediately, almost instantaneously, the cries of robbery erupted. You heard them, I heard them.
Oh, I didn't just hear them, Judge. I felt them. I mean, look, I watched Lomachenko's face after that decision was read. The man looked broken. He teared up backstage. His manager called it the biggest robbery in the middle of the day. That's not just hyperbole from a disgruntled corner, that's real emotion from someone who felt his fighter was clearly denied.
And that's why we need to dissect this, because on one hand, you have the emotion, you have the manager's strong words, you have Lomachenko's undeniable skill and late surge. On the other, you have three professional judges, all scoring for Haney. So, where do we even begin to unpack this, Marcus?
Let's start with the eye test, Judge. Forget the numbers for a second. When you watched that fight unfold, especially in the later rounds, what were you seeing? Because what I was seeing was Lomachenko really turning up the heat, landing some significant shots, really making Haney uncomfortable.
You're right, the eye test is crucial. And to be fair, Lomachenko absolutely had those moments, especially in the championship rounds. He found a gear that Haney for a moment seemed unable to match. His bodywork was phenomenal, his angles were slick, classic Lomachenko stuff. He was definitely putting rounds in the bank in the second half, in my opinion.
Exactly! I mean, you saw Haney struggling, right? He was getting hit with shots he wasn't expecting. His defense was being tested. It felt like Loma was closing the distance, getting inside, and just picking him apart at times. That late surge, man, that's what makes a champion. That's what wins fights.
But let's also acknowledge what Haney was doing. For the first half, maybe even two-thirds of the fight, he was dictating the pace. His jab was a weapon. It wasn't always a power jab, but it was consistent, it was accurate, it kept Lomachenko at bay and disrupted his rhythm. You can't just ignore that, you know? Boxing isn't just about who lands the most eye-catching bombs.
No, you're right, it's not. But a jab that's just touching, just tapping, versus a Lomachenko combination that's rocking your head back or driving into your ribs. There's a difference in impact, Judge, and that's what I think a lot of people felt. They saw Loma's punches having more effect, even if Haney was busier with that jab at times.
This brings us perfectly to the CompuBox stats, which are often cited in these controversial decisions. CompuBox showed Lomachenko outlanding Haney 124 to 110. Now, that's a pretty significant difference. 14 more punches landed for Loma. On the face of it, that supports the robbery narrative, right?
Absolutely! If you're landing more punches, traditionally, that's a good indicator you're winning rounds. So when you see that, and then see a unanimous decision for the other guy, your alarm bells are gonna go off. It's just simple math for a lot of fans.
But here's where it gets nuanced, and why judging is more than just a tally. Haney had superior accuracy, 27% to Lomachenko's 22%. So while Loma threw and landed more, Haney was more precise with the punches he did throw. And many judges prioritize effective aggression and accuracy over sheer volume.
Okay, effective aggression, I hear that term a lot. But how effective can it be if you're getting outlanded by 14 punches? I mean, come on. Are we talking about a couple of clean jabs that land on the guard versus a flurry to the body and head that visibly shakes your opponent?
That's the subjective element, isn't it? A judge sitting ringside has to weigh that. Was Haney's consistent jab controlling the distance, stifling Loma's offense, landing clean? Yes, it often was. Was Lomachenko landing more eye-catching power shots in bursts? Also, yes. It's about perception and criteria. A judge could legitimately value Haney's consistent control and accuracy more highly than Loma's bursts of volume, especially if some of Loma's volume wasn't deemed effective.
Fair enough, Judge. But we haven't even gotten to the elephant in the room yet, have we? That 10th round. That infamous round 10. This is where, for me, the debatable starts leaning dangerously close to robbery territory. Tell our listeners what happened in round 10.
You're absolutely right to bring that up, Marcus. This is the linchpin of the controversy for many. In round 10, CompuBox showed Lomachenko landing 11 punches to Haney's mere 5. Now that's a clear difference. The other two judges, Tim Cheatham and David Sutherland, both scored round 10 for Lomachenko, which again aligns with the stats and the general eye test for that round.
Right. Two judges saw what everyone else saw. Loma clearly won that round. He put it on Haney. So what happened with the third judge, Dave Moretti? The man scored it for Haney. How? How is that even possible, Judge?
This is where it gets really problematic. Judge Moretti's score of round 10 for Haney is frankly indefensible in my view. When you have such a clear statistical disparity, and the general consensus from two other judges and most analysts points to Lomachenko, it raises serious questions. Had Moretti scored that round for Lomachenko, which would have aligned with the other judges, the final scores would have been 115-113 across the board for Haney. Still a Haney win, but it would have felt less aggrieved.
Less aggrieved? It would have been a lot less aggrieved. That one scorecard just hangs over the whole fight. It screams something's not right here. It makes you wonder what else he might have seen or not seen in other rounds that were close. Because honestly, Judge, if you can miss a round that clearly, what else are you missing?
It diminishes confidence in the judging, there's no doubt about that. And that's the core of the controversy. The fact that the fight was agonizingly close overall, that's true. The fact that Haney did have his moments and a consistent strategy, also true. But that one aberrant scorecard, particularly in such a critical momentum-swinging round, just fuels the fire.
It makes a lot of people think, okay, even if Haney did enough to win some rounds, maybe even a majority, was he given too much credit in others? It opens the door to that kind of doubt. And for a fight of this magnitude, an undisputed championship, that's just unacceptable.
I agree, and it's why you saw many boxing experts, even after Haney secured the undisputed title, actually moving him down on their pound-for-pound lists. Think about that. You win the biggest fight of your career, you become undisputed, and some people are less impressed than they were before. That speaks volumes about the perceived quality of the win.
That's wild, isn't it? You'd think an undisputed champion would be shooting up those lists. But the performance, the way it played out, it didn't feel like a dominant, clear-cut victory over an aging legend. It felt like a struggle, a grind, and ultimately, a questionable decision.
So let's get to our robbery assessment. We laid out the context, the numbers, the specific controversy. Is this a clear robbery, or is it merely debatable, as some suggest?
Okay, I'm gonna lean into my enforcer role here. For me, when a fighter like Lomachenko, who is a master technician, a multi-division champion, puts on that kind of performance in the later rounds and is clearly outlanding his opponent, and then gets denied, and you have a judge making a frankly egregious mistake on a key round, that's leaning very, very heavily towards robbery.
I understand your strong feelings, Marcus, and I respect them. The round 10 scoring for Moretti is a glaring flaw. However, when I look at the fight as a whole, the overall competitive nature of it, the fact that Haney did implement a strategy, even if it wasn't always crowd-pleasing, and the sheer number of swing rounds where arguments could be made for either fighter, I still land in the debatable category. It was genuinely competitive. Haney's accuracy and consistent jab, particularly in the early to mid rounds, was a real factor. The decision was defensible from a certain perspective, even if flawed by one judge's inexplicable score.
Defensible maybe, but not satisfying. Not for the fans, and certainly not for Lomachenko. It's a stain on an otherwise incredible fight, isn't it? It just leaves a bad taste, you know?
It absolutely does. And that's the tragedy of it. Two elite fighters putting on a technical chess match that turned into a war, and the conversation is dominated by the scoring rather than the artistry. It speaks to the ongoing challenges in professional boxing judging.
So, what's next? Does Lomachenko get a rematch? Does Haney move up? What's the fallout for these two titans?
Well, Haney seems poised to move up to 140 pounds. He struggled to make weight for this fight, and the consensus is he's outgrown lightweight. A rematch with Lomachenko at 135 pounds seems unlikely given that. For Loma, it's heartbreaking. He's 35, and this was arguably his last real shot at undisputed. He showed he still has it, but where does he go from here?
Man, it's just a tough pill to swallow for Loma fans. He fought his heart out. And Haney, he got the win. He's undisputed, but he didn't win over all the skeptics. It's a strange kind of victory, isn't it? One that leaves more questions than answers.
It certainly is, Marcus. A win is a win, and Haney is technically undisputed. But the asterisk, whether deserved or not, will always be there for this one. And that, in itself, is a fascinating aspect of this sport. Thank you for breaking it down with me, as always.
Anytime, Judge. Always a pleasure, even when we're talking about fights that sting. Until next time, fight fans, keep those eyes on the ring.
Welcome, welcome, welcome back to the Boxing Debate Show podcast, where we don't just talk boxing, we live it. I'm Jay the Judge Harrison, and I've got my man, the one, the only, Marcus the Enforcer right here with me. Marcus, my brother, we've got a treat today, a hypothetical that's been cooking in the minds of fight fans for years now.
Jay, my man, it's always a pleasure. And you're right, this isn't just a treat, it's a full-course meal. A 5-star Michelin guide type of matchup we're dissecting today. We're talking about two of the most technically gifted, supremely confident, and undefeated fighters in boxing today. Shakur Fearless Stevenson versus...
Matter of time. Obviously, we can't go down. We can't go down to 135. So, he would have to come up. And, he can get this work anytime he ready.
I see greatness, man. I see greatness. Shakur.
The Dream, Devin Haney. Oh man, just saying those names together gives me chills.
Chills indeed, Marcus, because this isn't just two good boxers. This is a clash of styles, a battle of wills, a chess match at the highest level. You've got Shakur Stevenson, the defensive wizard, the slick southpaw who just makes you miss and makes you pay. And then you've got Devin Haney, the pure boxer, the ring general, with that piston-like jab, who controls distance and tempo like few others.
Absolutely, Jay. And you know, for a long time, these guys were almost on parallel tracks, coming up, dominating their divisions. But now, with Shakur moving up to 135 and Devin having pretty much cleared out that division and now venturing into 140, it's not just a what if anymore. It's a when will it happen? Because the boxing gods, the fans, we demand this fight.
We do demand it, Marcus. And let's get right into it, because everyone wants to know who wins. If these two stepped into the ring tomorrow, 12 rounds, championship on the line, who do you got? And more importantly, why?
All right, Jay, you're putting me on the spot right out of the gate. And it's a tough one because you're talking about two guys who are genuinely elite. But if I had to lean, if I had to put my money down, and I've thought about this a lot, I'm going with Devin Haney. And here's why. I think his jab, his consistency, and his ability to maintain distance are just going to be too much for Shakur over 12 rounds. Haney's got that classic fundamental boxing style that's just so hard to crack.
See, that's where we start to diverge, Marcus, and that's why we have these discussions. You know I respect Haney's game. His jab is a thing of beauty, a true weapon. But Shakur Stevenson, man, he's a different animal. He's not just defensive, he's offensively defensive. He makes you miss in ways that frustrate you, that make you overcommit, and then he punishes you. I believe Shakur's ring IQ, his ability to adapt, and his uncanny footwork would allow him to nullify that jab and find openings. I'm leaning Stevenson, and I think he outclasses Haney in the later rounds.
Okay, Jay, let's break it down then. You talk about nullifying the jab. How does Shakur do that against a guy like Haney, who has, what, a 71-inch reach? Haney keeps you at bay. He's not just sticking it out there, he's got excellent head movement to go with it. When Haney commits to his jab, he's usually safe on the exit. How does Shakur get inside consistently enough to land meaningful shots, especially against a guy who doesn't really stand in front of you?
That's the beauty of Shakur, Marcus. He doesn't need to get inside consistently. He needs to get inside precisely. Think about his fight against Oscar Valdez. Valdez is a power puncher, he's aggressive, and Shakur just dismantled him with superior timing and angles. Haney, while brilliant, is more of a rhythmic fighter. He likes his rhythm, he likes to establish it. Shakur's entire game is about disrupting rhythm. He'll frustrate Haney, make him miss repeatedly, and start to build confidence. We've seen Haney get tagged before. Sometimes he can be a little flat-footed after throwing that jab. That's Shakur's window.
I hear you, Jay, but there's a difference between Valdez and Haney. Valdez is a more static target, a guy who comes forward. Haney moves. Haney uses the entire ring. He circles, he pivots. He's not just a guy with a good jab, he's a general. He dictates where the fight takes place, and I think that's going to be a problem for Shakur. Shakur relies heavily on his ability to counter. But if Haney's not giving him the targets, if he's not overextending, it becomes a much harder night for Shakur to score points. You saw him struggle a bit to put away Edwin De Los Santos, who was also a slick southpaw.
That's fair. The De Los Santos fight was a chess match where Shakur chose to be safe, to box smart rather than push for the stoppage. Some called it boring, I called it intelligent. He still won comfortably. But I think the Haney fight would bring out a different Shakur. This is a legacy fight. He knows he needs to impress. He knows he needs to be dominant. And against Haney, his natural counterpunching instincts, combined with his southpaw stance, create so many angles. Haney's jab becomes less effective when a southpaw is constantly moving off to the right, creating that inside angle for a straight left. And Shakur's footwork is just next level.
But isn't that also a potential weakness for Shakur? His power, or perceived lack thereof. He doesn't have that one-punch knockout power that makes opponents hesitant to come forward. He's more of an accumulation puncher. And against a defensive savant like Haney, who also possesses great defense, great head movement, and knows how to ride punches, will Shakur's shots be enough to deter Haney? To make him respect that power? I don't think so. I think Haney will be able to walk through those shots, or at least absorb them, and keep working his game.
You raise a valid point about the power, Marcus. Shakur isn't a concussive puncher like, say, Tank Davis. But he's a precise puncher. He lands clean. And against a boxer like Haney, who relies on rhythm and control, those clean shots, even if they don't flatten him, they interrupt, they score, they build rounds. And in a fight between two such technically brilliant fighters, it often comes down to who lands the cleaner, more impactful shots, even if they don't have fight-ending power. Shakur's ability to land those sneaky lead left hands, or to catch Haney coming in with a counter right hook, those are the moments that swing rounds.
I think Haney's chin is really underrated too, Jay. He's taken some good shots in his career, and he's always recovered well, always shown that mental fortitude. He doesn't get flustered easily. I think that's key in a fight like this. You're talking about two guys who are incredibly calm under pressure. But Haney, he just seems to have that extra layer of composure. He can take a punch, reassess, and get right back to his game plan. Shakur, while slick, sometimes lets his emotions show a little more. Not in a bad way, but it's there. Haney is just stone-faced.
That's true. Haney's composure is elite. He's like a machine in there. But sometimes being too much of a machine can make you predictable, no? Shakur thrives on predictability. He watches, he learns, he adapts. I see Shakur taking the first 3 or 4 rounds to download Haney's tendencies, figuring out the timing of that jab, the angles Haney takes. And then, from round 5 or 6 onwards, I see Shakur starting to take over. He'll make Haney lead, force him into uncomfortable positions, and then just pick him apart with counters. It won't be a blowout, but it will be a clear decision for Stevenson, maybe 8 rounds to 4 or 7 to 5.
See, that's where I flip it. I think Haney establishes that jab early, Jay. He's not someone who waits. He comes out and dictates. And because of his discipline, because of his footwork, he's going to make Shakur work to get inside. Shakur's going to be chasing angles, trying to find those openings. And while he's doing that, Haney's just pinging him with the jab, scoring points, establishing control. And when Shakur does get inside, Haney's got a good clinch game, good short shots. He doesn't just grapple, he works. I think Haney builds an early lead, and then it becomes Shakur's job to play catch-up. And against a disciplined boxer like Haney, that's incredibly difficult. I see Haney winning a close but clear unanimous decision, maybe 116-112 or even 115-113 on all cards.
But what about the momentum shifts, Marcus? Every fight has them. Haney tends to have these periods where he's just cruising, doing his thing. But against a guy like Shakur, who can switch up his style, who can suddenly become more aggressive when he sees an opening, Haney might get caught off guard. I remember some moments in the Lomachenko fight where Loma was able to press Haney, make him uncomfortable. Shakur has that same ability, but with better defense. He's elusive, man. He just is. Haney might land a lot of jabs, but will they be clean? Will they be impactful enough to deter Shakur?
They'll be clean enough to score. And that's the thing about Haney. He's not looking to knock you out with the jab. He's looking to set things up, to rack up rounds, to break your spirit subtly. And against Shakur, who can be just as subtle, it becomes a game of who can apply their style more consistently. I think Haney's size, his length, and that consistent output with the jab will wear on Shakur. Shakur's going to have to exert so much energy making Haney miss that when he does get an opportunity to counter, he might not have the same snap on his punches.
That's a fair point about the energy expenditure, but Shakur's conditioning is top tier. He can move for 12 rounds, and he conserves energy brilliantly by making opponents miss. Every punch Haney throws that misses is energy wasted, and Shakur is a master at making you waste energy. The mental game in this fight, Marcus, is going to be insane. Who gets frustrated first? Who loses their composure for even a second? I think Shakur's ability to get under an opponent's skin, to make them look silly, will be a major factor here. He's got that swagger, that confidence, that just radiates.
And Haney has that too, though. His confidence is unwavering. He believes he's the best, and he's got the resume to back it up, having unified the lightweight division. He's beaten some serious names. Kambosos twice, Loma, Prograis at 140. He's proven he can adapt, he can win on the road, he can win against different styles. Shakur's resume is building, but he hasn't had that defining, undisputed moment yet. That experience in high-stakes, pressure cooker situations, I think gives Haney a slight edge.
True, the undisputed. Welcome back to the Boxing Debate Show podcast, where we don't just talk boxing, we live it. I'm Jay the Judge Harrison, and I've got my man, the one, the only, Marcus the Enforcer right here with me. Marcus, my brother, we've got a treat today, a hypothetical that's been cooking in the minds of fight fans for years now.
Jay, my man, it's always a pleasure. And you're right, this isn't just a treat, it's a full-course meal, a 5-star Michelin guide type of matchup we're dissecting today. We're talking about two of the most technically gifted, supremely confident, and undefeated fighters in boxing today. Shakur Fearless Stevenson versus...
Matter of time. Obviously, we can't go down. We can't go down to 135. So, he would have to come up. And, he can get this work anytime he ready.
I see greatness, man. I see greatness. Shakur.
The Dream, Devin Haney. Oh man, just saying those names together gives me chills.
Chills indeed, Marcus, because this isn't just two good boxers. This is a clash of styles, a battle of wills, a chess match at the highest level. You've got Shakur Stevenson, the defensive wizard, the slick southpaw who just makes you miss and makes you pay. And then you've got Devin Haney, the pure boxer, the ring general, with that piston-like jab, who controls distance and tempo like few others.
Absolutely, Jay. And you know, for a long time, these guys were almost on parallel tracks, coming up, dominating their divisions. But now, with Shakur moving up to 135 and Devin having pretty much cleared out that division and now venturing into 140, it's not just a what if anymore. It's a when will it happen? Because the boxing gods, the fans, we demand this fight.
We do demand it, Marcus. And let's get right into it, because everyone wants to know who wins. If these two stepped into the ring tomorrow, 12 rounds, championship on the line, who do you got? And more importantly, why?
All right, Jay, you're putting me on the spot right out of the gate. And it's a tough one because you're talking about two guys who are genuinely elite. But if I had to lean, if I had to put my money down, and I've thought about this a lot, I'm going with Devin Haney. And here's why. I think his jab, his consistency, and his ability to maintain distance are just going to be too much for Shakur over 12 rounds. Haney's got that classic fundamental boxing style that's just so hard to crack.
See, that's where we start to diverge, Marcus, and that's why we have these discussions. You know I respect Haney's game. His jab is a thing of beauty, a true weapon. But Shakur Stevenson, man, he's a different animal. He's not just defensive, he's offensively defensive. He makes you miss in ways that frustrate you, that make you overcommit, and then he punishes you. I believe Shakur's ring IQ, his ability to adapt, and his uncanny footwork would allow him to nullify that jab and find openings. I'm leaning Stevenson, and I think he outclasses Haney in the later rounds.
Okay, Jay, let's break it down then. You talk about nullifying the jab. How does Shakur do that against a guy like Haney, who has, what, a 71-inch reach? Haney keeps you at bay. He's not just sticking it out there, he's got excellent head movement to go with it. When Haney commits to his jab, he's usually safe on the exit. How does Shakur get inside consistently enough to land meaningful shots, especially against a guy who doesn't really stand in front of you?
That's the beauty of Shakur, Marcus. He doesn't need to get inside consistently. He needs to get inside precisely. Think about his fight against Oscar Valdez. Valdez is a power puncher, he's aggressive, and Shakur just dismantled him with superior timing and angles. Haney, while brilliant, is more of a rhythmic fighter. He likes his rhythm, he likes to establish it. Shakur's entire game is about disrupting rhythm. He'll frustrate Haney, make him miss repeatedly, and start to build confidence. We've seen Haney get tagged before. Sometimes he can be a little flat-footed after throwing that jab. That's Shakur's window.
I hear you, Jay, but there's a difference between Valdez and Haney. Valdez is a more static target, a guy who comes forward. Haney moves. Haney uses the entire ring. He circles, he pivots. He's not just a guy with a good jab, he's a general. He dictates where the fight takes place, and I think that's going to be a problem for Shakur. Shakur relies heavily on his ability to counter. But if Haney's not giving him the targets, if he's not overextending, it becomes a much harder night for Shakur to score points. You saw him struggle a bit to put away Edwin De Los Santos, who was also a slick southpaw.
That's fair. The De Los Santos fight was a chess match where Shakur chose to be safe, to box smart rather than push for the stoppage. Some called it boring, I called it intelligent. He still won comfortably, but I think the Haney fight would bring out a different Shakur. This is a legacy fight. He knows he needs to impress. He knows he needs to be dominant. And against Haney, his natural counterpunching instincts, combined with his southpaw stance, create so many angles. Haney's jab becomes less effective when a southpaw is constantly moving off to the right, creating that inside angle for a straight left. And Shakur's footwork is just next level.
But isn't that also a potential weakness for Shakur? His power, or perceived lack thereof. He doesn't have that one-punch knockout power that makes opponents hesitant to come forward. He's more of an accumulation puncher. And against a defensive savant like Haney, who also possesses great defense, great head movement, and knows how to ride punches, will Shakur's shots be enough to deter Haney? To make him respect that power? I don't think so. I think Haney will be able to walk through those shots, or at least absorb them, and keep working his game.
You raise a valid point about the power, Marcus. Shakur isn't a concussive puncher like, say, Tank Davis, but he's a precise puncher. He lands clean. And against a boxer like Haney, who relies on rhythm and control, those clean shots, even if they don't flatten him, they interrupt, they score, they build rounds. And in a fight between two such technically brilliant fighters, it often comes down to who lands the cleaner, more impactful shots, even if they don't have fight-ending power. Shakur's ability to land those sneaky lead left hands, or to catch Haney coming in with a counter right hook, those are the moments that swing rounds.
I think Haney's chin is really underrated too, Jay. He's taken some good shots in his career, and he's always recovered well, always shown that mental fortitude. He doesn't get flustered easily. I think that's key in a fight like this. You're talking about two guys who are incredibly calm under pressure. But Haney, he just seems to have that extra layer of composure. He can take a punch, reassess, and get right back to his game plan. Shakur, while slick, sometimes lets his emotions show a little more. Not in a bad way, but it's there. Haney is just stone-faced.
That's true. Haney's composure is elite. He's like a machine in there. But sometimes being too much of a machine can make you predictable, no? Shakur thrives on predictability. He watches, he learns, he adapts. I see Shakur taking the first 3 or 4 rounds to download Haney's tendencies, figuring out the timing of that jab, the angles Haney takes. And then, from round 5 or 6 onwards, I see Shakur starting to take over. He'll make Haney lead, force him into uncomfortable positions, and then just pick him apart with counters. It won't be a blowout, but it will be a clear decision for Stevenson, maybe 8 rounds to 4 or 7 to 5.
See, that's where I flip it. I think Haney establishes that jab early, Jay. He's not someone who waits. He comes out and dictates. And because of his discipline, because of his footwork, he's going to make Shakur work to get inside. Shakur's going to be chasing angles, trying to find those openings. And while he's doing that, Haney's just pinging him with the jab, scoring points, establishing control. And when Shakur does get inside, Haney's got a good clinch game, good short shots. He doesn't just grapple, he works. I think Haney builds an early lead, and then it becomes Shakur's job to play catch-up. And against a disciplined boxer like Haney, that's incredibly difficult. I see Haney winning a close but clear unanimous decision, maybe 116-112 or even 115-113 on all cards.
But what about the momentum shifts, Marcus? Every fight has them. Haney tends to have these periods where he's just cruising, doing his thing. But against a guy like Shakur, who can switch up his style, who can suddenly become more aggressive when he sees an opening, Haney might get caught off guard. I remember some moments in the Lomachenko fight where Loma was able to press Haney, make him uncomfortable. Shakur has that same ability, but with better defense. He's elusive, man. He just is. Haney might land a lot of jabs, but will they be clean? Will they be impactful enough to deter Shakur?
They'll be clean enough to score. And that's the thing about Haney. He's not looking to knock you out with the jab. He's looking to set things up, to rack up rounds, to break your spirit subtly. And against Shakur, who can be just as subtle, it becomes a game of who can apply their style more consistently. I think Haney's size, his length, and that consistent output with the jab will wear on Shakur. Shakur's going to have to exert so much energy making Haney miss that when he does get an opportunity to counter, he might not have the same snap on his punches.
That's a fair point about the energy expenditure, but Shakur's conditioning is top tier. He can move for 12 rounds, and he conserves energy brilliantly by making opponents miss. Every punch Haney throws that misses is energy wasted, and Shakur is a master at making you waste energy. The mental game in this fight, Marcus, is going to be insane. Who gets frustrated first? Who loses their composure for even a second? I think Shakur's ability to get under an opponent's skin, to make them look silly, will be a major factor here. He's got that swagger, that confidence, that just radiates.
And Haney has that too, though. His confidence is unwavering. He believes he's the best, and he's got the resume to back it up, having unified the lightweight division. He's beaten some serious names. Kambosos twice, Loma, Prograis at 140. He's proven he can adapt, he can win on the road, he can win against different styles. Shakur's resume is building, but he hasn't had that defining undisputed moment yet. That experience in high-stakes, pressure cooker situations, I think gives Haney a slight edge.
True, the undisputed... Welcome back to Ringside Ruminations, folks. Today, we're lacing up our gloves for a trip down memory lane, straight into a fight that to this day divides opinions like few others. We're talking Oscar De La Hoya versus Jermaine Taylor first, a middleweight title unification bout from 2009 in the electric atmosphere of Las Vegas.
Divides opinions is putting it mildly, Jay. That fight, man, it was a powder keg even before the first bell. You had the Golden Boy Oscar, a legend, but maybe, just maybe, showing a few cracks in the armor. And then you had Jermaine Taylor, bad intentions, a guy who could hit like a truck, but sometimes, he just wasn't quite there mentally. It had all the ingredients for drama, and boy did it deliver.
Indeed, Marcus. On paper, it was a clash of styles and eras. De La Hoya, the veteran, the showman, known for his speed, precision, and that devastating left hook. Taylor, younger, stronger, the reigning middleweight champion, looking to solidify his legacy. The stakes were incredibly high, not just titles, but careers and legacies were on the line. The build-up alone was phenomenal, generating immense hype for a fight that promised fireworks.
And fireworks we got, just maybe not in the way everyone expected. I remember thinking going into that fight, Oscar, even at that stage, he still had a certain aura, a presence that could intimidate. But Taylor, he was coming off some tough fights, a loss to Pavlik, but he still had that raw power, that athletic ability. You just knew it wasn't going to be a walk in the park for either guy. Vegas was buzzing, absolutely buzzing.
Absolutely. Let's get into the action itself, because that's where the controversy truly began to brew. From a purely technical standpoint, the early rounds were fascinating. De La Hoya started strong, using his jab, moving well, and landing some crisp combinations. He looked like the Oscar of old in flashes, you know? Fast hands, good footwork, just dictating the pace.
He did. He came out looking sharp, man, like he hadn't missed a step. Those first 3 or 4 rounds, I was thinking, okay, Golden Boy still got it. He was popping that jab, landing the left hook, and Taylor, I felt, was a little hesitant, trying to figure Oscar out. He was trying to assert his strength, but Oscar's movement was just too good early on. He was making Taylor miss, making him reach.
However, as the fight progressed, we started to see a shift. Taylor began to find his rhythm. His jab, while not always as flashy as Oscar's, became more consistent, and he started to work the body. He applied more pressure, trying to walk De La Hoya down. It became a much more physical fight in the middle rounds.
Yeah, that's where Taylor really started to come alive. He realized he couldn't just stand back and admire Oscar's work. He had to impose his will, and he did. He started landing those thudding body shots, those heavy rights that, even if they didn't land flush, they were still taking something out of Oscar. You could see Oscar's movement start to slow down just a touch. His legs weren't quite as springy.
Exactly. And this is where the scoring becomes so subjective. Some judges might favor De La Hoya's cleaner, more eye-catching shots from the early rounds and his occasional brilliant flashes later on. Others might lean towards Taylor's consistent pressure, body work, and perceived control of the ring in the latter half of the fight. It really became a tale of two halves, or perhaps even a more granular round-by-round debate.
For me, watching live, I was scoring it incredibly close, like flip a coin close in some rounds. Oscar would land a beautiful 3-punch combo, then Taylor would come back and land 2 heavy shots that just looked like they hurt more. Who's winning that round? The guy who landed the flashy stuff or the guy who landed the power? That's the eternal boxing question, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And as we got into the championship rounds, it became even more contentious. Both fighters seemed to dig deep. De La Hoya, with his incredible experience, knew he needed to finish strong. Taylor, sensing he might be ahead, but also knowing Oscar's reputation for late-fight heroics, kept pressing. There were some wild exchanges in those final rounds, particularly the 11th and 12th, that truly left everything in the balance.
Oh, the 11th and 12th. You're talking about pure grit right there. Oscar, with his back against the wall, started landing some of those bombs again. You saw flashes of the Golden Boy trying to knock Taylor out. And Taylor, he just ate him and kept coming, you know? He wasn't backing down. He was almost daring Oscar to keep throwing. That's what made it such a compelling watch. You couldn't breathe in those last few minutes.
And then, of course, the bell rang, and we went to the scorecards. The tension in the arena was palpable. Everyone knew it was going to be close. And when the scores were read, it was Jermaine Taylor by split decision. One judge had it 115-113 for De La Hoya, and the other two had it 115-113 and 116-112 for Taylor. Total chaos erupted.
Chaos is the right word, Jay. I remember looking around the media section, and half the guys were already shaking their heads. De La Hoya's face when they announced it, man, he looked absolutely stunned. He knew he'd put in the work, he believed he had done enough, and for it to go against him in a split decision, that's where the robbery cries really started to get loud.
Precisely. De La Hoya was visibly upset, stating immediately that he felt he deserved the victory. He campaigned hard for a rematch, believing the decision was unjust. Now, to your point about a robbery, this is where we have to tread carefully. A close decision, even a controversial one, doesn't automatically equate to a robbery. It implies clear, unequivocal evidence of scoring malfeasance or gross incompetence.
But you can't deny the feeling of a robbery, Jay. When you watch a fight and you're seeing one guy land the flashier punches, the cleaner shots, control the earlier rounds, and then lose a split decision, it feels like something was taken from him. Especially a fighter like Oscar, who always fought with his heart on his sleeve. You want to see the deserving guy win, and in that moment, for a lot of people, that wasn't Taylor.
I understand the emotional response, Marcus, truly. Boxing is an emotional sport. However, when we look at it through the cold, hard lens of the 10-point must system, it becomes a more nuanced discussion. Taylor's activity, his consistent jab, his body work in the mid to late rounds, those are factors that judges are trained to consider. While De La Hoya's shots were often sharper, Taylor often landed with more frequency and arguably more cumulative effect in certain periods.
Frequency is one thing, but impact is another, right? Oscar was landing those clean snapping shots that were visibly moving Taylor's head. Taylor was more of a grinder. He was consistent, yes, but was he doing enough damage? Was he winning enough of those individual exchanges convincingly enough to overcome Oscar's moments of brilliance? That's where I think many fans struggled with the cards.
It's the age-old debate between effective aggression, ring generalship, defense, and hard, clean punching. Some judges prioritize the aggression and sustained pressure, others the cleaner, more accurate shots. This particular fight really highlighted the discrepancies that can arise. If you watched it with the sound off, focused purely on who was landing and controlling, you could absolutely make a case for Taylor winning based on his consistent work rate and body assault, especially in the later rounds.
I get that, but I also felt like De La Hoya was dictating where the fight happened more often, even if he wasn't always throwing. His footwork was still superior, his defense for the most part was still very good. Taylor often had to chase him, and when Taylor did get close, Oscar would often tie him up or counter beautifully. It wasn't just Taylor walking him down, it was more intricate than that.
That's a fair assessment. There were rounds where De La Hoya would land a combination and then skillfully move away, avoiding Taylor's retaliation. However, there were also rounds where Taylor would press forward, pin De La Hoya against the ropes, and land multiple shots to the body and head, even if De La Hoya blocked some of them. It was a tit-for-tat affair, truly. My scorecards, rewatching it, had it incredibly tight. Maybe 7-5 for either man, depending on how you weigh certain criteria.
7-5, that's what I'm saying. That's a hair's breadth. And when it's that close, the fan in you, the guy who's been watching Oscar for years, you want the legend to get the nod, especially when he brings that kind of effort. You wanted him to have that storybook ending, even if it was just one more big win. But Taylor, credit where credit's due, he fought his heart out too.
Exactly. And this is why it's debatable. There isn't clear evidence of a robbery in the sense of one fighter clearly dominating every aspect of the fight and still losing. It was simply an excruciatingly close contest that could have gone either way. The judges' scoring reflected the subjective nature of the sport, and in this instance, two of them saw enough for Taylor to earn the victory. It happens frequently in boxing. Close fights generate controversy without necessarily being larcenous.
But it sure felt larcenous to Oscar. I mean, the man demanded a rematch immediately. That tells you everything, doesn't it? He genuinely believed he was cheated out of that win. And when a fighter of his caliber, with his experience, feels that way, it adds a whole other layer to the controversy. It wasn't just fans crying foul, it was the Golden Boy himself.
Indeed, his immediate reaction was a testament to how close he felt the fight was, and how strongly he believed he had done enough. From a strategic standpoint, a rematch made perfect sense, both financially and to settle the score. However, that rematch never materialized, and the what-if question hangs heavy over this fight's legacy. It left a sour taste for many De La Hoya fans, solidifying their belief that he was robbed.
Absolutely. It's one of those fights that years later, you still talk about, you still pull up clips, you still argue with your buddies over who really won. And for me, that's a sign of a truly memorable, if frustrating, boxing match. It wasn't a one-sided beatdown, it was a legitimate, back-and-forth war that just happened to have an outcome that pissed a lot of people off. And you know what? That's what keeps us coming back to boxing. The drama, the injustice, the triumphs.
It certainly does. The legacy of De La Hoya versus Taylor 1 isn't just about the result. It's about the enduring debate, the subjectivity of scoring, and the raw emotion that close decisions can ignite. It was a fight where both men... Welcome back to Ringside Rulings, everyone. Today, Marcus and I are diving deep into a fight that still makes my blood boil when I think about it. We're talking about the 2007 lightweight title bout, an undercard gem that turned into a rotten apple. Joel Casamayor versus Jose Armando Santa Cruz.
Rotten apple is an understatement, Jay. This wasn't just a bad decision. This was an absolute heist, a highway robbery committed right there in the ring. I mean, Santa Cruz fought his heart out, put on a clinic, and then got his dream snatched away. It still burns me up.
You're not wrong, Marcus. For those who might not remember, this was on the massive Miguel Cotto versus Shane Mosley undercard, so there were a lot of eyes on this fight. Casamayor, a seasoned veteran, was coming off a significant layoff, which added an interesting dynamic. Santa Cruz, a younger, hungry fighter, was looking to make his mark.
And make his mark he did, at least in the ring. From the opening bell, Santa Cruz was the aggressor, the busier fighter. He was landing clean shots, controlling the pace, dictating the narrative of the fight. It felt like a masterclass from the younger guy, showing the veteran that his time might be winding down.
Absolutely. And this isn't just us with our subjective glasses on, Marcus. We have the data, the objective, cold hard facts of CompuBox. And that's where this decision goes from merely controversial to indefensible. CompuBox showed Santa Cruz outlanding Casamayor by a staggering margin, 246 punches to 129. Let that sink in for a moment. 246 to 129.
Man, you say that number and it still hits me like a body shot. That's nearly double the punches landed. It wasn't a slight edge. It was a comprehensive drubbing in terms of volume and effective aggression. How do three professional judges sit there, ringside, with the best view in the house, and not see what literally everyone else saw?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? When the scores were read, it was a split decision. One judge, Glenn Trowbridge, scored it 114-113 for Santa Cruz. That's a close score, but at least he got the winner right, albeit perhaps not by a wide enough margin for what we saw. But then, we had Paul Smith and Adelaide Bird scoring it 114-113 for Casamayor. For Casamayor! How do you even do that?
How do you do that? It's beyond comprehension. I remember watching it live, and my jaw just dropped. You could feel the air go out of the arena. It was like a collective gasp of disbelief. Everyone knew Santa Cruz had won. The crowd, the commentators, even the casual fans could see it. It makes you wonder what criteria these judges were even using.
And that's where the fundamental breakdown occurs. We talk about the 4 criteria for judging a fight: effective aggression, ring generalship, defense, and hard and clean punches. Santa Cruz clearly dominated in effective aggression, landing nearly twice as many punches. He was certainly the ring general, dictating the action. His defense wasn't spectacular, but it was solid enough to avoid significant damage, and the punches he landed were clean and visibly impactful.
Exactly. Casamayor, bless his heart. He's a legend, but he just wasn't doing enough that night. He was largely passive, trying to pick his spots, but those spots were few and far between. It wasn't the vintage Casamayor, and the judges, for whatever reason, seemed to score based on reputation, or perhaps even a narrative they had in their heads before the fight even started.
It raises the uncomfortable question of whether judging can be influenced by pre-fight narratives or even the star power of a fighter. Casamayor was the established name, the champion. Santa Cruz was the challenger. Is there an unconscious bias towards the incumbent, making judges work harder to find rounds for them even when they're not clearly winning?
I think there has to be some of that, or just pure incompetence. When you have a punch differential like that, 246 to 129, and 2 judges still give it to the guy who landed less than half, it's not just an error of judgment. It's a systemic failure. It undermines the integrity of the entire sport, Jay. What's the point of fighting your heart out if the scorecards are already written in some parallel universe?
That's precisely why this particular bout is often cited as one of the biggest robberies in boxing history. It wasn't a subjective could-go-either-way situation. This was blatant. It was so egregious that it became a cautionary tale, a benchmark for bad judging. And honestly, it leaves a lasting scar on the sport.
Think about Santa Cruz. He had the performance of a lifetime, fighting on a huge stage against a big name. He executed his game plan perfectly. He outboxed, outworked, and outlanded the champion. He did everything you're supposed to do to win a world title. And he walked out of there without it because of some absolutely mind-boggling scorecards.
His career trajectory too, Marcus. Imagine the momentum he would have gained from that win. A world title, a massive upset on a huge card. It would have catapulted him into a different league. Instead, he suffered a demoralizing loss that really wasn't a loss. It's hard to recover from something like that mentally, to trust the process again.
And it also affects the fans. How many casual fans saw that and just thought, this sport is rigged? You lose credibility. You lose the trust of the very people who fuel the sport when the outcome is so detached from what unfolds in the ring. It alienates everyone.
Agreed. It contributes to the perception that boxing is corrupt, which is a reputation the sport has struggled to shed for decades. Every time a decision like this happens, it drags us back. What solutions do you even propose for something this extreme? How do we ensure this doesn't happen again, or at least not with this level of disparity?
Well, for starters, more accountability for judges. If you put in a scorecard that is so wildly off, based on objective statistics and general consensus, there needs to be consequences beyond just a slap on the wrist. Maybe temporary suspensions, mandatory retraining, or even permanent removal if it happens repeatedly. These aren't just minor errors. They're career-altering for fighters and reputation-damaging for the sport.
I agree completely. There has to be a robust review process. We talk about instant replay for other sports, but boxing judging is still so subjective, yet in this case the subjectivity seemed to completely override all objective evidence. You can't just wave your hand and say, well, they saw it differently. Not when one fighter landed almost twice as many punches.
And it wasn't just volume, it was the quality of shots too. Santa Cruz was connecting with purpose, snapping Casamayor's head back at times. It wasn't just pitter-patter stuff. He was genuinely hurting Casamayor in some rounds. So it's not like the punches were just grazing shots. They were legitimate, scoring punches.
That's a critical point, Marcus. Effective punching, not just landing. Santa Cruz's punches looked effective. Casamayor, while he has a masterful way of making opponents miss and countering, just wasn't able to establish that rhythm consistently enough. His moments were too few, too far between to warrant winning the majority of the rounds.
So, looking back, what does this fight tell us about judging in general? Is it a rare outlier, or is it a symptom of a deeper problem that occasionally flares up to this level of absurdity?
I think it's a symptom, Marcus, but an extreme one. We see controversial decisions all the time, fights that could go either way where fans disagree. But a fight like Casamayor-Santa Cruz, where the evidence is so overwhelmingly one-sided, that's a different beast. It highlights how important consistent training, unbiased observation, and adherence to established scoring criteria truly are. It makes you wonder what kind of bubble these judges are operating in.
It feels like they were watching a completely different fight, you know? Like they had their eyes closed for half of it. Or they were scoring a shadowboxing contest instead of a real professional bout. The lack of explanation, the lack of accountability afterwards, it just adds insult to injury for a fighter like Santa Cruz.
And that's the silent killer of motivation. When you pour your life into a sport, make sacrifices, train relentlessly, and then you're robbed of your just reward by the very officials appointed to ensure fairness. It's a profound betrayal. It affects the fighters, their families, their teams, and the fans who invested their time and money.
It definitely does. This fight, for me, will always stand as a stark reminder of what can go wrong in boxing. It's a blemish on the sport's record. A clear, undisputed, absolutely maddening robbery that should never have happened, and hopefully, lessons were learned, even if it feels like they often aren't.
One can only hope, Marcus. For the sake of the fighters and the fans, we need to demand better. More transparency, more accountability, and judges who score what they see, not what they wish to see. The Casamayor-Santa Cruz fight is a painful exhibit A in the argument for reform.
Preach, Jay, preach! Well said. It's a fight that truly defines the term boxing robbery. Thanks for breaking it down with me, Jay.
Always a pleasure, Marcus. And to all our listeners, thank you for tuning into Ringside Rulings. We'll catch you next time with another deep dive into the sweet science, the good, the bad, and the truly ugly. Stay safe out there. All right, Marcus, we're talking about a night that still echoes through the halls of boxing history. August 16th, 2005, MGM Grand, Las Vegas. The undisputed middleweight championship. Bernard the Executioner Hopkins, the seemingly invincible veteran, against the young lion, Jermaine Bad Intentions Taylor. And man, did this one leave a bitter taste for a lot of people.
Bitter taste! Judge, it left a gaping wound! People still talk about this fight like it happened yesterday, and for good reason. Bernard Hopkins, the alien, a future Hall of Famer, walked into that ring as the undisputed champion, a man who hadn't lost in over a decade. And he walked out. Well, he walked out without his belts, but everyone knew he won that fight. Everyone felt he won that fight.
That feeling is what makes it so interesting, isn't it? On paper, Taylor got the split decision. 115-113 for Taylor, 116-112 for Hopkins. And then the deciding card, 115-113 for Taylor again. So it was close, numerically. But I think what you're getting at, Marcus, is the optics. The way the fight unfolded visually, round by round.
Exactly, the optics! You've got Hopkins, the master strategist, the guy who could make you miss and make you pay. He was 40 years old, mind you, still operating at an elite level, defending his titles for the 20th time. And Taylor, he was undefeated, young, strong, and Olympic medalist, but he was stepping into a whole different league against Hopkins. He was supposed to be the future, but Hopkins was still the present, and he was schooling him, plain and simple.
Let's break down that schooling a bit, though. Taylor started fast, didn't he? Those early rounds, I remember Taylor pushing the pace, landing some clean shots. He was trying to establish his presence, maybe catching Hopkins a little flat-footed in the opening exchanges. He had that youthful exuberance, the power. He wanted to make a statement.
He did. And that's fair. Those first 2, maybe 3 rounds, Taylor was aggressive. He had the burst, the speed. But this is Bernard Hopkins we're talking about. He's not a guy you can just steamroll for 12 rounds. Hopkins adapted. He started to time Taylor, catch him coming in, make him pay for his mistakes. It was classic Hopkins. Slow burn, tactical masterclass.
That's where the nuance comes in for the judges, I think. When Taylor was throwing with conviction. But Hopkins was the one landing the cleaner, more effective shots in the mid to late rounds. He was controlling the distance, clinching when necessary, and delivering those sneaky right hands and body shots that sap an opponent's will. It wasn't always flashy, but it was effective.
Effective? It was surgical. I mean, Hopkins was dictating the tempo. He was making Taylor miss, making him look wild at times. Taylor would have these flurries, these bursts of activity, but a lot of them were blocked, or they weren't landing cleanly. Hopkins, on the other hand, every punch he threw, it seemed to have a purpose, a sting to it. He was chipping away, winning rounds clearly.
The statistics, if you look at them, are often cited to support both sides. CompuBox had Taylor landing slightly more punches overall, but Hopkins had a higher percentage. And as we always say, it's not just about quantity, it's about quality and effectiveness. The power punches, which often impress judges more, were pretty even. But again, the impact of Hopkins' shots seemed greater.
See, impact is the key word there. You could feel Hopkins' punches. You could see Taylor reacting to them. Taylor was younger, yes, but he looked like the fighter who was getting frustrated, who was trying to force things as the fight wore on. Hopkins just seemed calm, collected, in control. This was his house, you know? And then boom! They announce the decision, and the whole arena just goes silent, then erupts in boos.
That reaction, I remember it vividly. It was a shock. You had the HBO commentators, who are usually quite impartial, sounding genuinely surprised. Jim Lampley, Larry Merchant, Emmanuel Stewart, they all seemed to lean heavily towards Hopkins winning, and they weren't shy about expressing their disbelief when the cards were read. That's a strong indicator when the neutral observers are that taken aback.
And Merchant, man, he was practically beside himself. That's when you know something's rotten in Denmark, or in this case, Vegas. Hopkins himself, a guy who usually keeps his composure, was visibly upset. He felt robbed. And when a fighter of Hopkins' caliber, with his experience, tells you he got robbed, you listen. You really do.
But let's play devil's advocate for a moment. What about the argument that judges sometimes favor activity, even if it's less effective? Taylor was consistently active, often initiating exchanges, pushing forward. And it's also true that sometimes the champion needs to do more than just manage the fight. They need to clearly win rounds. Perhaps Hopkins, in his veteran wisdom, was doing just enough to win, but not enough to convince every judge beyond a shadow of a doubt.
That's a convenient narrative for a bad decision, Judge. Doing just enough for Hopkins often meant completely neutralizing his opponent and landing the more telling blows. He wasn't running, he was boxing masterfully. To suggest he didn't convince the judges when he was clearly the more dominant and effective boxer for at least 7 or 8 rounds, maybe more, that's just a stretch. It feels like an excuse for an error, not an explanation.
It's certainly a thin line between effective aggression and missed punches. Judge Paul Smith, who scored at 116-112 for Hopkins, clearly saw what you saw, Marcus. He favored Hopkins' counterpunching and control. But Dwayne Ford and Dave Moretti, who scored at 115-113 for Taylor, must have given Taylor credit for those early rounds and his bursts of activity throughout. It comes down to what you prioritize.
And they prioritized wrong, that's the thing! It wasn't just about early rounds. Hopkins took control from the 4th, 5th round onwards. He was landing those powerful right hands, shaking Taylor. Taylor was never really able to hurt Hopkins, never really put him in danger. Hopkins, on the other hand, was making Taylor think, making him hesitant. That's dominance. That's how you win championship fights.
I remember Hopkins talking about it, and he felt the sentiment that new blood was needed in the division played a role, that perhaps the judges, consciously or subconsciously, wanted to see a new star emerge. It's a cynical view, but not entirely uncommon in boxing, especially in high-profile events. The narrative of the young, undefeated challenger dethroning the aging legend is a compelling one for the sport.
Oh, absolutely. The passing of the torch narrative is a dangerous one when it interferes with objective scoring. Taylor was the Golden Boy Promotions fighter, the next big thing. Hopkins was, well, Hopkins. He was 40, established. The money, the future, it was all with Taylor. I'm not saying it was outright corruption, but the pressure to anoint a new king can definitely sway perceptions, even unconsciously.
It raises questions about judge accountability, doesn't it? When such a monumental decision is met with widespread disagreement, it damages the credibility of the sport. And this wasn't just a regular fight. This was for the undisputed middleweight championship. All the belts on the line. The stakes couldn't have been higher.
It was for history, Judge! Hopkins was looking to extend his legacy even further. and he was denied that in the eyes of many. It definitely hurt the sport's reputation, no doubt about it. You can't have your most dominant champions feeling like they have to knock a guy out to get a decision. It sets a bad precedent.
And the immediate aftermath. Hopkins demanded a rematch, naturally. He truly believed he won, and he wanted to prove it. So a few months later, December 3rd, 2005, they ran it back in Las Vegas. And that time, Taylor won by unanimous decision. A much clearer outcome, 115-113 on all three cards.
Which, ironically, made the first fight look even worse. Because in the rematch, Taylor was undeniably better. He adjusted, he was more confident, he controlled the pace more. It wasn't a barn burner, but Taylor earned that second win. But that first fight, man, it just hangs there. It's like a phantom punch that never landed but counted anyway.
So our robbery assessment, debatable. Some observers felt Hopkins won, though the decision was more debatable than some other controversial bouts. Would you agree with debatable, or would you push for something stronger, Marcus?
Oh, I'm pushing hard. I'd call it a highly questionable decision bordering on robbery. For me, it leans heavily towards robbery. When the vast majority of professional analysts, commentators, and even a large segment of the casual viewing public think the wrong guy won, it's more than just debatable. It's a mistake, a big one. It's a stain on the record, not Taylor's, but on the judges' scorecards.
Fair enough. And that's the beauty and the frustration of boxing, isn't it? Subjectivity. We can rewatch these fights 100 times, and people will still see different things. But the Taylor-Hopkins eye fight is a perfect case study for how a seemingly objective scoring system can still produce such contentious results.
Absolutely. It's why we're still talking about it nearly 2 decades later. Bernard Hopkins never truly lost his aura even after that decision, which speaks volumes about how people viewed his performance. And Taylor, while he got the win and went on to have a good career, that first victory will always have an asterisk next to it for many boxing fans. It's a fight that defined both of their careers in different, controversial ways.
Indeed. A truly memorable, if not universally celebrated moment in middleweight history. A fight that reminds us that sometimes, even when a hand is raised, the real winner in the hearts and minds of the fans can be someone else entirely. Thanks for breaking this down with me, Marcus. Always a pleasure.
Anytime, Judge. Anytime we can talk about justice or the lack thereof in the squared circle, I'm there. Until next time, keep your guard up and your eyes on those scorecards.
Welcome, fight fans, to Ringside Ruminations. I'm Jay, the Judge Harrison, and sitting across from me, ready to lay down the law, is the one and only Marcus the Enforcer Black. Tonight, we're stepping back into a specific heavyweight showdown, a rematch that, while perhaps less outright scandalous than its predecessor, still leaves a few wrinkles in the fabric of boxing history. Evander Holyfield versus Lennox Lewis II, November 13th, 1999, Las Vegas.
Jay, my man, it's good to be here. And you hit it right on the head. This wasn't just a rematch. This was the rematch. After what happened in New York in March of '99, that draw that still makes my blood boil, everyone knew this wasn't just for belts. This was for pride, for legacy, for the soul of the heavyweight division. You felt that tension, man, even through the TV screen.
Absolutely, Marcus. The first fight, for those who might need a refresher, saw Lennox Lewis dominate for large stretches, land the cleaner, harder shots, control the ring, and yet, somehow, the judges saw it as a draw. One judge even scored it for Holyfield, which, to many, was an absolute travesty. So coming into the Thomas & Mack Center, the pressure on the judges, on the fighters, on the entire sport was astronomical. No one wanted another messy outcome.
Astronomical, my friend. I remember thinking, if this ends in another draw, or worse, another bad decision, boxing is going to have a real problem. The public was already fed up. You had to give it to them straight this time. And both fighters, you could tell, they were coming to make a statement. No doubt in their minds. Especially Lewis, I think. He felt robbed. He was robbed.
Let's be clear, Marcus. The general consensus was that Lewis won the first fight comfortably. So the narrative heading into the rematch was about justice being served. But here's where it gets interesting. Did that narrative, that lingering controversy from the first bout, influence the perception or even the scoring of the second fight? Because if you re-watch the rematch, it's not nearly as clear-cut as some remember it.
You're touching on something crucial there, Jay. Because I remember sitting there watching it live, and yeah, Lewis won. But man, Holyfield came to fight that night. He wasn't the same guy who looked a little outmatched in the first one. Evander, the real deal, showed up. He brought that grit, that determination, that heart of a lion we all loved him for. He was getting inside, digging to the body, making it a proper war at times.
He absolutely did. Let's talk specifics. In the first fight, Lewis established his jab early and often, keeping Holyfield at range, landing power shots from the outside. In the rematch, Holyfield made a conscious effort to negate that. He started quicker, tried to get inside Lewis's long reach, and he had moments, particularly in the mid to late rounds, where he looked like he was genuinely hurting Lewis or at least making him uncomfortable.
Yeah, those rounds, I'm thinking like 5, 6, 7, maybe even 8, where Holyfield was just relentless. He wasn't the bigger man, he wasn't the longer man, but he was just pushing forward, trying to break Lewis down. You saw Holyfield's incredible conditioning kick in. He was throwing combinations, body head, body head. He wasn't just throwing one punch and hoping. He was working, man, he was working.
That's a key distinction, Marcus. Lewis, for his part, maintained his composure. He still used that jab effectively, even if Holyfield was getting inside more. He landed some significant uppercuts and right hands, particularly when Holyfield rushed in, but it became a much more tactical, grueling affair. It wasn't Lewis dictating the terms from a distance as easily as he did in the first fight. Holyfield was forcing the issue.
I think Lewis had to dig deeper in this one. You know, when you're the favorite and you've got that long reach and that powerful jab, sometimes you can get a little comfortable. But Holyfield wouldn't let him be comfortable. He made Lewis fight every single second. And that's what made it a great fight. Even if it wasn't a knockout classic, it was a chess match, but with heavy artillery.
And the judges' scorecards, which ultimately gave Lewis a unanimous decision, were 117-111, 116-112, and 115-113. Now, the 117-111, for me, is far too wide. That's Lewis winning 9 or 10 rounds, which simply wasn't the case. The 116-112 is a bit more plausible, giving Lewis 8 rounds. But that 115-113, giving Lewis 7 rounds to Holyfield's 5, that felt the most accurate to the action I saw unfold.
See, that's where the enforcer in me comes out, Jay. When I heard those scores, especially the 117-111, I thought, man, are they trying to overcorrect here? It felt like, because of the uproar from the first fight, they just made damn sure Lewis got the decision this time, even if it meant stretching the truth a little on the scorecards. It almost felt like a makeup call, you know?
That's precisely the makeup call theory, Marcus, and it's a valid one to consider. After the first fight's public outcry, there was immense pressure for a decisive Lewis victory. And sometimes judges, consciously or subconsciously, can be swayed by the narrative or by what they perceive as the correct outcome for the sport. It's a tricky psychological dynamic.
It's human nature, I guess. But you've got to put that aside when you're judging. You're there to judge that fight, those 12 rounds, not to fix past mistakes. And that's why some people still argue that Holyfield deserved at least a draw in the rematch. Because if you erase the memory of the first fight and just look at the second one in a vacuum, it was a very competitive fight, probably a toss-up for a lot of rounds.
I agree completely. If we were to score it purely on a round-by-round basis, without any preconceived notions, there are definitely arguments for Holyfield taking more rounds than the official card suggested. Particularly with his late surge, he really turned up the heat in the championship rounds. And that's where a lot of the debate still stems from. Lewis won, yes, but how clearly did he win?
Exactly. Some people saw Holyfield in those later rounds just digging, and he's landing those clean shots, maybe not concussive, but they're adding up. He's putting pressure on Lewis. Lewis is doing what he needs to do, staying disciplined, picking his spots. But it wasn't a walk in the park, not by a long shot. Holyfield made him earn every single penny.
From a technical standpoint, Lewis's jab was still the most effective weapon in the fight. Even when Holyfield got inside, Lewis would often tie him up, or use his size to lean on him, or catch him coming in with short punches. It was a masterclass in managing distance and neutralizing an opponent's strengths, even when that opponent was giving it everything he had.
Yeah, Lewis was the bigger man, and he used that size, man. He leaned on Holyfield. He tied him up. He made Holyfield carry his weight. That saps your energy over 12 rounds. Evander's a warrior, but even warriors get tired when you've got a giant like Lewis draped all over you. It was smart boxing from Lewis, I'll give him that. But it wasn't pretty, and it wasn't dominant in the way the first fight was.
Precisely. The lack of clean, definitive moments for Lewis in the rematch, compared to the first fight, is what fuels the debatable robbery assessment. It wasn't a robbery in the sense that Holyfield clearly won and Lewis got the nod. But it also wasn't a clean, undeniable Lewis triumph that silenced all critics. It left just enough ambiguity for the debate to continue.
And that's why we're talking about it today, man, almost 25 years later. Because it was one of those fights that, even with a clear winner on paper, you walk away scratching your head a little. You know Lewis got the belts, he got the glory, but a part of you still thinks, man, Holyfield really laid it all out there. He deserved more credit than the scorecards gave him.
It speaks volumes about Holyfield's incredible spirit. To come back after being largely outboxed in the first fight, to make the adjustments, to push Lewis to his limits in the rematch, it just solidifies his real deal moniker. He never knew how to quit. And it solidifies Lewis's legacy as a truly great heavyweight, capable of adjusting and winning even when facing an incredibly determined opponent.
Oh, absolutely. Both guys are legends, no question. But this rematch, for me, it just solidified the idea that sometimes, even when you get a unanimous decision, it doesn't always tell the full story of what went down in that ring. It was a tough, gritty fight that showed the best of both men, even if the judges still had a bit of a mixed bag going on.
So wrapping this up, Marcus, if you had to give it a final verdict, was justice served for Lennox Lewis in the rematch, or did the controversy just shift from one fight to the next, albeit in a less egregious way?
Man, that's a tough one, Jay. I'd say partially. Justice was partially served. Lewis got the win he probably deserved the first time. But Holyfield? He fought his heart out and, if we're being completely honest, deserved more respect on those cards. It wasn't a robbery, but it definitely wasn't a runaway win either. It was a fight for the ages, no doubt about it.
A fitting way to put it, Marcus, and that's why these fights endure. They challenge our perceptions, they make us reevaluate. It truly was a heavyweight clash that had everything: a controversial past, an intense present, and a legacy that still sparks debate today. Thank you, Marcus, for breaking it down with me.
Anytime, Jay. Always a pleasure, my man. And to all our listeners out there, keep those debates alive. That's what makes boxing great.
Indeed. For Marcus the Enforcer Black, I'm Jay, the Judge Harrison, and this has been Ringside Ruminations. We'll catch you next time with another deep dive into boxing's most memorable moments. Until then,